Chapter 13. The Broken Red Soul of Voldemort. Harry stood in his testing room, every wall covered in the golden gleam of defensive charms and protective wards, each distinguishable from one another only by the geometric shape of their patterns. In striking contrast, the floor under his feet had been changed to deep purple stone, a mimicry of Hogwarts that did not hold her slow, pulsing life, only the steady gleam of rock. There were no lights. When Hermione came, Harry cast charms in the corners for her to see by. To him, though, the world was never dark. By his feet, the small bird he had caged chirped indignant tones, angry at the imprisonment. A common pigeon of the London streets, pale blue light, so alive and flickering with the desire for freedom. Harry gestured his staff towards the wall, and its red light left him alone in the center of the room, his hands empty and bare, only emerald green fingers of light. He knelt, and with a touch, let the metal cage fall away as his hands trapped the bird in his palms, its wings beating angrily, its clawed feet squirming. "I'll bring it back," he reminded himself. "But I have to know." The pale blue light stilled, as if it heard his intention like an audible song. Harry closed his eyes, though the vision before him did not dim. He had never needed open eyes to see, if it was his eyes that really saw at all. He rather thought it was his mind, his brain trying to reconcile the fact that he was seeing by letting him control its vision with ocular muscle movements. But lately, more and more, he had learned to widen his sight far past the constraints of human eyesight, nearly to the back of his head. He flexed his power and looked, his own emerald green light filling in the details of wings and feathers, and a heaving breast as the bird sucked in panicked breaths. The bird shrieked at the feeling of his power, animals so much more aware than humans of when he regarded them with his new technique, reacting with fear just as the dogs in the park had, and the cats, and the rats in the alleys, and the birds in the trees. Knowing something looked at them that was dangerous and powerful, a great predator of the world. Harry sighed, and let the energy fade, the pale light of the bird alone, except where his emerald fingers caged her. And with another breath, Harry willed her light to stop and felt her struggle cease. Life gone with the stopping of a pattern. He looked at her and saw her limp neck and claws, wings no longer pressing tightly against his hold. With a grimace, he made her lights move again, and the bird shrieked in surprised panic. She fluttered wildly against his palms. Again, Harry stilled her light. Again, she fell still. This time he waited, falling to the floor on his knees and sitting upright, staring down at the bird in his lap. He counted and felt her body cool, the heat leaving her. He fleetingly wished Hermione was there. She could take temperatures and readings that could only be read, not listened to audibly. But he hadn't wanted her here for this, hadn't wanted to know himself just how far he could go. When the bird was stiff with death, he made her light quicken again, and warmth burst from the cold carcass like it was infused with the sun, the light that had grown paler with aging death deepening to its normal blue hues, pulsing, racing with life. The bird leaped into the air, free, only to flutter wildly at the nearest wall, unable to see in the darkness. Harry stood, and with a spell caged her again. Next time he would try a larger, smarter animal, and he would wait longer before he quickened them again. He had to know, for sure, just how far the boundaries could be pushed. After all, the magical world claimed true necromancy was impossible. Inferi did not possess souls, zombies had no sentient brain, and skeletons no skin or will of their own. All only did the bidding of the dark witch or wizard who created them. The dead could not come back to life, not as they once were. Resurrection was not possible by any law of magic. But in Surrey, he had made a dead tree live, and now in Grimmauld Place, he had killed a pigeon and brought it back. And in time, he would need to learn if it was only plants and animals whose patterns could be quickened. When Crouch told Riddle of the potential prophecy, it was in low tones of excitement. The Death Eater explained how it all could have happened, how a prophecy could have led to his master's defeat, how it must speak of Harry Potter as a catalyst that would throw apart all of his plans, how Voldemort must have learned of the prophecy, no doubt by Dumbledore's taunts, and been led to kill a baby on his own without proper plans in place to destroy him. It was a trap, yet impossible to resist. And if you yourself cannot kill him, my lord, then you must make his death come about in some other way. Send assassins, or raise an army. Once he is dead, your rise should go unimpeded. Tom Riddle knew the reasoning was not sound. Some part of him, the analytical, bitter part, was angry that it was not. But he wanted to believe it, wanted to blame a boy for why everything was not falling into place as it should, for why with greater numbers and skills and values his former army had failed, for why most of his followers were dead, and why no new ones would come to him, dead or cowards or both. I have no more money to hire assassins or raise any significant force, Riddle said finally, sparing a thought for lost opportunities and the fact that those of his that had died had also been the most wealthy. Then we make them, my lord. Crouch hissed in fervent tones, the snake on his cheek hissing in sinking counterpart. We create them. And Tom Riddle reluctantly began to smile. He certainly had few better ideas. Creature was sensible. His new master was odd, for certain, but not harsh or unforgiving. Creature could live with Master Potter as head of House Black. He did not seem to mind dirty floors or hallways, though his witch friend did. He barely seemed to taste the food placed in front of him, and never suggested a favorite dish or expressed a dislike of any particular food. Master Potter would wander in after Muggle schooling and toss a bag into the same chair in his office and disappear for hours into his lab, a room of odd devices Creature had never seen. He watched Master Potter frequently as the master worked magics or sat back in a long chair to listen to a book read aloud. Master Potter was blind, but not in any way Creature could fathom. Creature did not like those green eyes on him, disliked even more the spike of energy that came from the master on occasion, speeding his heart and making him have a marked desire to clean vigorously the cluttered attic or a dusty closet. Creature was an old elf for such a large house, though he would never admit it. His bones grew weary after too much magic, his skin tight and leathery. But when the master's eyes gleamed brighter and the energy filled him, Creature nearly felt like a young elf in his prime with his first contract, ready to take on a manor full of Irish pixies and poltergeists. And worse, so much worse, when the master's gaze moved away, Creature felt bereft, the loss keener with the reminder of how far he had fallen. It was enough to make an old elf seek the look, seek out the master's approval, if only for a moment, only for a second in time. He loved and hated that desire with equal fervor, hated that it came from someone the mistress had so despised before the master did the impossible and displaced her against house-elf magic, which should have prevailed. And yet he loved being useful again, a good elf, with a family to serve and a house to set to rights. So, confused, Creature did what he needed to do. He dug out an old reminder, a failed job, and placed it where the master might look upon it, and waited to see what might happen. And he hoped, if he was right, that the master would look on him too. Harry had made a point of telling the house, elf, that nothing was to be moved. Growing up, moving furniture was his worst adversary. The casual displacement of a chair enough to send him to the ground, or a dropped plastic toy to stab his unknowing foot. Now, even with his increased sight, moving things bothered him. He couldn't maintain looking for more than minutes at a time without growing increasingly tired, so he liked his home ground to be stable and organized, everything in its own place. He figured he might be slightly obsessive-compulsive, though movement made him more angry than nervous or distraught. He knew the location of everything in Grimmauld Place, with the only exception being the still cluttered attic and Creature's own realm off the kitchen pantry. So when he stepped into the hallway from the rainy streets, shrugging off his damp cloak and hanging up his bag to dry, he knew something was not right. It didn't hit him at first. The brown and purple light of the plastered walls nearly hid that all-too-familiar pattern that he had seen before. It made no sense. He had been at Grimmauld Place only the day before. There was no wooden table against the wall where the screaming portrait once had been, and definitely no bloody red soul centered upon it like a macabre offering. Harry hissed, his hand tightening on his staff in reaction. Creature! Yellow came, and Harry looked upon the elf as it fell to the ground at his feet and trembled, the green of his magic covering its natural yellow light and highlighting every feature in keen detail, from the flopping overly large ears to his large hairy bare feet. Master, Creature, sorry, master, forgive Creature. The thing began to beg, and Harry knew the beast had somehow placed a sliver of Voldemort's soul, the blasted wizard he had hoped was dead, upon a table in his own house. Is this a trap? Harry asked inanely, then shook his head. If it was the house, Elf would not tell him so. Hadn't it vowed to hate him forever at some point? No, Creature wailed. Creature only wants to show the master something Creature found. Harry's lip curled. Don't lie to me. The house elf's mouth snapped shut, its teeth clicking. He saw its ears drop further, long claws digging into the wood under its feet as it whispered. Creature was given the locket from Master Regulus before Master Regulus died. Creature was to destroy it, but could not. Creature punished himself by not cleaning the house for 10 years, 1 year for every time Creature tried and failed. Then, Creature decided to not ever clean again. Harry blinked, a useless reaction to surprise as reactions go. He supposed to a house elf not cleaning would be punishment, but Regulus Black, the Death Eater. Creature trembled again, and the longer Harry looked at him, the more the elf seemed to sink into the floor, his hands now limp at his sides. Yes, Creature whispered, and Harry frowned, casting a glance at the glimmering red pattern laying docilely ahead. Why would a Death Eater be trying to kill part of Lord Voldemort? And more importantly, this would be 3 so far. How many bloody times was that blasted Dark Lord going to be popping up in his life? Creature raised his palms up towards him. Creature does not know, please, master. Creature does not know. Harry sighed. It's fine, don't worry about it. If you couldn't kill it, no doubt Regulus couldn't either, and I'm sure he tried. The blasted snake was the same way. Or at least the charms upon it had been hard to break through. Killing it, not so much. Still, get up already. Harry snapped and was pleased when Creature leapt spryly to his feet, wringing his hands together, stepping far too close for comfort. Harry moved down the hall towards the red pattern, and heard its faint whisper not with his ears, but inside his mind. I'm beautiful, captivating, put me on, put me on. Harry didn't think the bloody red light of Voldemort's soul pattern was either beautiful or captivating in the least. He saw a glimmer of metal underneath the red, and supposed whatever object the soul inhabited might be pretty if seen with more usual eyes. But to him, the thought of a human soul inside a metal shell was disturbing. Could it do anything at all? The snake had seemed to act independent of the soul it hosted, but the weak Voldemort piece that had been kissed had been wholly human, if monstrous. Harry looked closer, observing a closed locket, then finally reached out and held it in his hand, the metal far colder than it should be. The hiss inside his mind came louder, but he pushed it away with disgruntled huff. Master, can you destroy it? Creature asked tentatively, and Harry turned to look back at the house elf, who straightened under his eyes like a soldier coming to attention. Yes, Harry mused softly, then ran his gaze over the deep red pattern. I will, when I'm through with it. He had dreaded finding a human soul to practice upon, but lo and behold, a sliver of one had just found itself within his grasp. Surely a little experimentation on a Dark Lord would be forgiven. After all, the wizard had mutilated his own soul first. Over the last months, Harry had learned enough about quickening from his tests on animals to know most of its limitations. There was one. If the body had decayed past a set point, then the quickening would not take. First, the body had to be repaired. Then the life within could flourish again, instead of dying as quickly as it reanimated. With plants, it was much simpler. Any plant life could be quickened and bud with new growth. But to repair an entire dead branch, then the branch would need to be set to a state where it could grow naturally. A root system, for one, or else like any plucked flower the life would slowly dim and die once again. All living things were either growing or dying, and he discovered quickly that young life beat faster than old life, which had already began to slow. And if he took our old animal and made its life fast, the old animal's body weakened much more quickly than it should, its body unable to handle the youth of its own heart. But he could change an old animal pattern into a new one and quicken it at a younger speed. The possibilities for eternal youth did not escape him, but the thought of having to kill something over and over, only to bring it back to life younger, did not appeal to him. And would the new life, reset into a younger pattern, even hold any of its older memories? Was there any point in living forever if you would not even know you were? How had the philosopher's stone worked? Flamel had managed it somehow. Perhaps the stone had only affected the body and not the soul at all. But no matter how he tried it, he could not make the pattern younger without also speeding up the life within. But that was all with animals and plants. Human life had yet another layer over life and body pattern both. A soul. Every single person Harry had met had their own unique colors and shades and patterns, not like the generic brown of all cats and blues of all birds. And without that soul, every human body was a white shell, empty of color. The body pattern and the soul pattern, and within the life that made them live. Voldemort's soul sliver was dark red infused with black, a bloody speck of humanity tainted with dark magic. Within the locket that it inhabited, Harry knew it was aware of him. It tried to speak to him again and again, different tactics each time, cajoling and threatening in turn. That, at least, made sense with his other theories, that souls were aware of where they were, even when outside of a human body's pattern. Their soul remained the same and aware of itself, and this locket Voldemort was no different. Harry killed it and quickened it and killed it again. He found that he had to quicken it quickly, or just like the snake it began to fade and go away nearly immediately to wherever human souls went, and he wasn't sure he could bring it back again. Calling it the afterlife seemed overly romantic. A higher state of consciousness sounded more scientific, though he had no proof souls were conscious there. Death. What was death for the human soul? Where did the blasted things go? The mystery nagged at him like a splinter under his skin, worse than the constant failures to make a computer or TV work in Grimmauld Place. So when he got tired of killing Voldemort, he decided instead to try something a bit different. The wizard was pretty much dead anyway, and he doubted the bodiless thing could feel pain. It had no nerves, after all, or skin, or even a brain. Just a conscience trapped in cold, cursed metal. It was no different than performing exploratory surgery on a cadaver to take the soul pattern apart and see exactly what parts were red and which were black, what made it hiss and what made it laugh, what made it dark and what made it light, what made its pattern unique, and what would happen if he changed the pattern even slightly. He was pretty sure Hermione still wouldn't approve of his logic, though. Hermione did not know what secret Harry was keeping, but she knew he had one. She had expected him to more busy once classes started, but during the winter break he had remained distant, more often than not spending long hours at Grimmauld Place without inviting her along as he normally did. More than once she called the Dursley house to find him gone, and each time she felt remotely embarrassed that she was the last to learn his whereabouts. Usually it was the other way around, but whatever project he was working on he didn't share. She idly questioned the house elf, and found even Creature strangely reluctant to complain about his master, going oddly pale at her words and finding some task to busy himself with. Fear. What had Harry done now? When school started up again, she let her worries slide. Harry was still working with her on two other projects, after all, both of which were sufficiently complicated that she didn't know how he had any spare time at all. But then, one day, on a whim as she visited, she had the random urge to peek into the test room on her way to the Black Library, where she was to meet Harry, and a hand on the knob found it locked and warded tight, beyond even the unlocking charm's ability to open. Her eyes narrowed at the brass knob. Then she turned on her heel and marched to the library. Enough was enough. What are you hiding? Hermione's angry voice brought his head up around from the magical diagram he was observing, its complicated spell weaving a design to elegantly hide the books behind its curtain by tricking the eyes into thinking the curtains hid a dusty window. Dust was an odd thing. Flickers of brown and white, dead skin and living organisms, so small their patterns were nearly indistinguishable from the lights around them. Harry, I'm talking to you. She grumbled, and he shook his head and focused with a frown. What's wrong? She stomped closer and flung her light into a chair with a toss of wild, curling hair. You won't tell me what you're working on, and you've locked the door to your testing room. You've never done either before. Harry's heart sank. He much doubted she would care to know that he had learned, painfully, that when a core thread of personality in a pattern was taken out, the entire construct collapsed with shrieks that told him the soul in question was entirely too aware of what he had just done to it. He had been able to rebuild Voldemort's broken soul from memory, a process that had taken 4 entire afternoons of tight focus, and created another hypothesis. If he was familiar enough with a soul before it was broken, it was possible he could in fact fix the break that marred it. If he knew a soul well enough, it was possible that he might be able to create it again from nothing but light. And most intriguing of all, if he could just figure out exactly what made a soul, he might be able to create an entirely new soul pattern. But before either of the last two could ever happen, he would have to do much more study on soul patterns in person, not to mention attempt to catalog what made certain personalities act in certain ways, determine how much soul patterns changed over time, and figure out why some souls broke when others did not. It would take a lifetime to achieve, if even that was enough time. It's not that you have a secret, Hermione finally said softly, when Harry did not speak. It's just that you've never kept them from me. Harry looked at her. His magic flexing like an idle cat would stretch its paws out in the sun. He saw the way her face creased with concern, anger fading to worry, green eyes and skin like a mask over her own inner light, as his magic strove to show him the details he had failed to see before. She blinked and shivered, and he saw goosebumps rise on her arms. From his one trip to Diagon Alley since he perfected his new technique, he had learned that magical people and creatures knew when he looked at them as their muggle relatives did not. Something magical inside them recognizing the influx of foreign magic, like one would feel the touch of strange hands at the nape of one's neck. And mostly, they either loved or hated the sensation. Harry let the sight fall away and sighed. I have another portion of Voldemort's soul. I've been using it to test my hypotheses about my abilities that we discussed previously after Viola's paper on the laws of transfiguration. Hermione sucked in a breath and held it, her blue-violet light pulsing with agitation. Then she let it out and spoke swiftly. I can't believe you didn't tell me. How long have you had it? Harry lifted his chin. Since just before winter break. I didn't think you would want to be part of the tests. Hermione shot to her feet and began to pace with jerking flashes of light that his eyes struggled to follow, her hands motioning in gestures he could not comprehend as she spoke. Vivi Voldemort's soul. Of course I would want a KK now. And if the tests were too much for me to handle, I would leave. I'm not some fainting V-Violet you have to protect, or worse, hide yourself from. I can handle it if you can manipulate soul matter. I can handle it if you can kill people with a flick of your wrist, because guess what, Harry B.B. Blind Potter, I can too. Maybe not in the same way, but magic makes it entirely too easy. And if you can bring things back to life, well, I want to KNN now. We've already violated enough magical laws already. You think this one would bother me forever? I can get over the existence of dragons and space expansion charms and love potions and barbaric house elf registries, but not your abilities. She whirled and spun like a top, angry light pulsing with streaks he hadn't seen since his entrance into the Triwizard tournament. This time, it was definitely himself she was angry at. And her voice dropped to deadly whisper. I've been your FF friend for years. I've never been scared or intimidated by your abilities. They might worry me at times. I might be scared, F. For you if you're able to pull of some of these stunts and it becomes known. She stopped and seemed to turn away. Harry didn't risk looking to see what her expression was. He still wasn't sure if she cared for his energy running through her, and now was definitely not the time to ask or test it if she didn't. Are you going to destroy it? She asked softly, and Harry answered her quickly. Yes, I've about gotten what I can from it anyway. She made some sound in her throat. Well, good. I'd like to see your notes. Harry grimaced. She had learned Braille since their friendship began, finding it useful. But that wouldn't help this time. I haven't typed any of them. With the subject matter, I didn't think it prudent. Right, she murmured. You're right. She stepped closer to him. I'd like you to tell me what you've learned. It wasn't a demand, but there was some note in her voice he couldn't decipher. Harry nodded immediately. He had already made one mistake, and now was the time to recover. All right, I can tell you now. No, she said, and began to move towards the door. I'm still too upset to listen. Why you, that is. I'm not happy that you didn't trust me. Harry had never really gotten into a serious fight with her before. Statistically, he knew he was due for one. Still, he had never thought she would be as upset as she was over this. I do trust you. I just thought I would. Make things easier. She sniffed, and to his horror he had the deep suspicion she was about to cry. The thought brought him to his feet, but she was already stepping through the door. It's fine. I'll be back tomorrow. And she was gone. Harry sunk back down into his chair, feeling hollow. Then he frowned fiercely and rose again. He absolutely refused to let her think for a minute that he ever intended to hurt her feelings. He grabbed his staff and stomped to the door, casting a glare towards the golden test room on his way past. Harry explained his dilemma with as sparse details as he could manage to his aunt. She told him to send flowers and patted him on the head like he was cute. Harry told Dudley, and his cousin suggested flowers and chocolate. His uncle, on the drive to the Grangers, suggested a great deal of groveling instead. Harry opted for all three, but not necessarily at the same time. He created the flowers from wooden splinters and placed them inside an enchanted crystal pattern, conjuring them again and again until Dudley had sworn on his honor as a Dursley that they were some blooming shade between blue and fancy purple. The chocolate was donated by his aunt, who had enough frozen cookie dough to last them through an apocalypse. And by the time Harry and his uncle arrived at the modest brownstone the Grangers resided in, Harry knew it was late, far past the time for supper. He left his uncle in the car and ascended the steps. When he rang the bell, Mrs. Granger opened the door with a puzzled frown. "Harry, is something wrong?" He only shook his head and held out the objects in his hand. "Give these to Hermione." Mrs. Granger gently took both crystal and plate, speaking with a confused tone. "Don't you want to come inside? Hermione's just up the stairs." "No, that's all right." He clenched one fist around his staff. "I'm seeing her tomorrow, thanks." And with a nervous tilt to his head, he turned and began to descend the steps, looking carefully to see the concrete steps from the shadows in his vision. "Okay." Her voice drifted down to him before he heard the door close. Without looking back at the house, he slid inside his uncle's automobile, and they drove away. Hermione knew she was being foolish. She had overreacted, certainly. But he didn't tell me he had a piece of Voldemort's soul inside his house. That was extreme, and he had done it because he thought she would disapprove of experimenting on it, or that she would be disturbed that he could. She should have stayed and talked to him. But she had had the oddest desire to cry, though whether from frustration or surprise or hurt, she herself hadn't even been certain. And that would have been embarrassing. She had to just get away for a moment and think things through, and that's exactly what she had done for the last few hours. Think. Now, she nearly felt she should apologize to him, which barely made any sense at all. He wasn't obligated to tell her everything just because he was her boyfriend, though still a sole fragment of the most evil Dark Lord in decades. A knock at the door broke her from her spiraling thoughts. Her mum poked her head through, frowning. "Hermione, honey, Harry was just here. H here," she yelped, floundering off her bed, but her mother stepped further inside, shaking her head, something tucked in her arms. "He was, honey. He wanted me to give these to you. Did you two have a tiff?" Hermione stiffened. "What makes you say that?" Her mother grinned impishly and lifted her hands. "Chocolate and flowers mostly, though I must say your father never managed to carry off the flower portion so well. What a beautiful color." Hermione looked down as her mother gently placed a large plate of Petunia Dursley's signature homemade cookies on her desk, followed by what had to be a creation of Harry's. The triangular prism glowed with a soft inner light, illuminating the blooms trapped within, a single large hyacinth blossom that had its many smaller blooms ranging from deep violet external petals to piercing inner blue. A hyacinth, so similar to the Latin word for a deep shade of blue. The only word closer to her own soul's shade was, "What do the symbols mean?" Mother inquired, and Hermione blinked, looking below the blossom to what was inscribed beneath in the specific Braille code used for Latin words. She gently ran her fingers across the raised dots, though her eyes told her already what it said. "Pretty awesome, lux me, et violaceus precious, light of mine in blue-violet, my precious blue-violet light." Hermione's eyes, to her infinite frustration, began to water again. With a growl, she swiped her hand across her face, and then turned to her mother defiantly. "Can you drive me to Harry's house?" Later, they would be teased unmercifully by both families for the drama that made Mr. Dursley drive all the way across town to the Granger house to deliver a present, only for Mrs. Granger to drive Hermione back to the Dursley house in the middle of the night to thank Harry for it. But at the time, Mrs. Granger only thought it unbearably sweet, while Mr. Dursley grumbled half-heartedly while remembering his own days of courting the elder hot-tempered Evans girl. He had apologized far more than once himself. Hermione darted across the perfectly manicured lawn, but Harry had seen her pattern from inside the house and opened the door before she could step onto the small porch alcove. She hesitated a second when his eyes met hers, shivering as his energy moved through her, and he looked down at her with hesitant eyes of his own. Then she sprang into his hastily opened arms. and with a loudly stuttered "cess, squeezed him tight and refused to cry again. And Harry returned her hug with warm arms, smiling against her hair. "I rather thought that was my line." Hermione laughed wetly, then softly punched his shoulder as she leaned back to look up at him. "I overreacted, but you were out of line. Agree we're mutually sorry and move on." Harry grinned. Reciprocated despondency. Hermione giggled, very downcast and disheartened. Harry laughed, then leaned his forehead softly against hers. "Want to watch me slay a Dark Lord tomorrow?" Hermione smiled up at him, the emerald depths of his gaze glowing softly as he looked into her eyes. "Completely, utterly, and entirely certain I'll be thrilled to." Harry squeezed her arms in relief. "It's a date." In early summer, on a bright and sunny day, Hermione Granger entered the test room in Grimmauld Place. The bare stone floor and plain walls lit only by an absently cast Lumos charm in one corner. And Harry placed into the air a silver locket and held it there with his power, the air thick with energy as he manipulated a soul and pulled something unfathomable from the depths of engraved metal, something that looked both like a black vortex and a bright light to her eyes, all at the same time. It whispered to her of her worst fears and her greatest desires in the bare instant she stood, frozen to the side. Then Harry Potter closed his fist, and the light shadow simply died. No scream, no flash, nothing that signaled that a great evil had left the world. Later, Harry would tell her he saw the red of its broken pattern fade away to the other place, leaving behind only a metal locket. But all she saw was her best friend standing in his own sphere of power that hazed the air, a silver locket hovering above his fingertips, a satisfied smile on a face that was stark with magical energy. And it truly hit her that she was standing not just beside a genius wizard and a brilliant scientist, but a very, very powerful sorcerer. In 6 months' time, Albus Dumbledore had made so little progress that even his own patience was wearing thin. Severus Snape reported that the Tom Riddle from the ring had retreated, hiding in some warded area where his spy could not reach him, licking his wounds and planning, giving Albus, Order precious time to find and destroy what they could of his soul pieces. His professors had begun searching all of Hogwarts that they could, even going so far as to confiscate the Marauder's map and its secret from the Weasley twins, exploring every passageway and hidden alcove. But as the term ended, no Horcrux had yet been found. Dumbledore's pensive had proven useful for storing memories, but with a normal term as headmaster at Hogwarts and his duties as chief warlock over a very anxious and fretful Wisengamot, time spent reliving the past had not been frequent enough for him to make much headway into places Tom Riddle might have hidden something as precious as a soul. His guess about the Lestrange vault had indeed been correct. The Hufflepuff cup and its resident Horcrux were indeed inside. But the goblins were taciturn and unhelpful, sneering at every offer of mere gold or property or jewels. They wanted goblin artifacts, and more specifically, they wanted the sword of Gryffindor, which they knew he now had in his possession after its loss of more than a century. Dumbledore wouldn't have minded much giving them the sword. It was enchanted to return to the next person who needed it to defend the school, an enchantment the goblins could never break on their own. What he did not like was that they also wanted an extravagant amount of gold, jewels, and property along with it. And he finally settled on an amount. The goblins insisted on running tests upon the sword to ensure it was not a forgery, a blatant insult to Albus' own honor, and counted each individual galleon and inspected every single priceless jewel offered from the Dumbledore vault, a process that took another entire week when certain jewels were deemed unworthy. The short creatures smirked the entire time with their sharp teeth, but when Albus finally held the cup in his hands, he knew it was worth it. The Horcrux reeked of dark magic and curses of protection, and was undoubtedly a portion of Voldemort's soul. Destroying the Horcrux was another matter entirely, however, for without the sword that he suspected would have sliced the cup into pieces, freeing the protected soul to be destroyed, there was only one other force that could destroy things charmed to be indestructible. Fiendfire, sentient flame infused with dark magic, whose use was regulated strictly by the Ministry. Well, what the Ministry doesn't know won't hurt them, Albus Dumbledore thought merrily, and set off to find a private place to kill what should have died long ago. More corpses, my lord. Tom Riddle turned back from the cave in the Scotland mountains, looking over the 3 dead bodies flung onto the rock. Muggles, wizards, witches, all the same in death, all empty husks able to be reanimated into soulless puppets. He had always liked the idea of inferi, creatures of the dark, following his every whim. It appeared in his own future he had made his dreams come true. Crouch claimed he had made an entire army of the fell monsters, though where he had hidden them away was a mystery. Now he made more, from homeless muggles and old, frail men, and in women who would simply disappear, to witches and wizards drunk in bars or traveling alone. Dozens, then hundreds. An army impervious to pain and hunger, immune to nearly everything that could harm normal humans, each individual stronger than 10 men. Only weak to the power of flame and daylight. Tom Riddle figured he would attack by night, and even if Potter managed to cast a flame spell on several dozen, there was no conceivable way for him to destroy an entire army of the puppets from every direction. He would be waiting with them. He and all who were left that followed him, Crouch, the 2 Carrows, Yaxley, Jugson, and Avery. If somehow the Inferi failed, his Death Eaters would not. And with Potter dead and the prophecy obsolete, he would be free of any predictions there might be of his own downfall, free to begin infiltrating the ministry once again, seeking whatever crack there was in its defense. Lord Voldemort would be a feared name once more. Chapter 14. The White of Flame and Inferius. Rufus Scrimgeour narrowed his eyes at the venerable and extremely innocent-looking elderly wizard. We find significant evidence of substantial use of fiendfire only 10 kilometers from Hogwarts, and you expect us to believe you don't know anything about it. Albus Dumbledore folded his arms. Some of the damage you speak of was done quite a few months ago. I can only assume some students were experimenting. Rufus flung his hands into the air. Experimenting with dark magic. And what of the recent damage? Students sneaking back into school to practice said dark magic. Dumbledore sighed deeply. I cannot say, Minister. I do not monitor the grounds outside Hogwarts and Hogsmeade at all hours of every day. I do have important duties. Rufus slapped one palm down on his desk. Fine. But if I find one more instance of evidence of the use of dark magic in that area, I will be sending in a team of Aurors to investigate. There are still Death Eaters out there, and rumors of them raising some sort of force. Over a dozen reports of witches and wizards disappearing on their own property, then several more failed attempts by masked Death Eaters to apprehend them. The Ministry has been forced to place a warning in the Daily Prophet. Dumbledore clasped his hands in his lap. I read the statement myself. The information is alarming. Have you any leads? Rufus resisted the desire to snarl. Albus Dumbledore, for all that he tried to look innocent and grandfatherly, held significant power behind him. It wouldn't do to rail at the man like his predecessor and find himself kicked from office months later. They're in Scotland, in the wilderness. 4 or 5 Death Eaters, no doubt led by Crouch Jr. Close to Hogwarts. Dumbledore raised a brow and Rufus shook his head. No, I don't think so. His eyes narrowed. And I doubt they were flinging fiendfire about either, but I'm leaving no stone unturned. I have groups scouring the mountains. It's only a matter of time before we find them. Dumbledore nodded solemnly. I wish you luck, Minister. Rufus sat back in his chair, eyes drawn to the large map of the country on his wall, the parchment marked with multiple lines drawn in red and blue. I don't believe in luck. Harry leaned back into the sofa cushions, one arm tossed around Hermione's shoulders as she rested against him, a slim book of tan light cradled in her hands as she read aloud. The Grangers had thrown him a birthday party at their house. He was now 16 years old. He absently listened to the comforting rise and fall of Hermione's voice as she read about the life of Albert Einstein, a renowned physicist who had invented the theory that Harry hoped to reconcile with magic. A book given to him by Dudley, who saw the word physics on the front and assumed Harry would find it interesting. Harry hadn't had the heart to tell the other boy he already knew nearly everything there was to know about Einstein, from biographies 3 times the size of the one Hermione read from. It was certainly still nice to listen to Hermione read, her familiar soft tones rising and falling, while the rest of his and Hermione's families talked in laughing tones to one another around the large dining room table and scattered living room chairs. Mrs. Granger had his aunt off in the corner with two of Hermione's aunts, all discussing something in whispered tones. His uncle and one of Hermione's uncles were talking about the latest renovations to their favorite golf course, while Hermione's dad and her other uncle ranted about automobile designs and car racing tracks, with Mr. Granger far preferring Formula One, while the uncle thought anything other than dirt tracks were pretentious and overly driven by endorsement deals. Dudley sat with three of Hermione's cousins, all four boys concentrating on the widescreen TV and the multiplayer shooting game, frequently hissing curses at one another 1 second and laughingly joking the next. Hermione's only other cousin, an older girl called Jessica, sat alone by the window, a faint lavender pattern that had once been pristine now marred by ugly cracks, threatening to break. Something was going wrong with her, though earlier Hermione insisted she had heard nothing off regarding her oldest cousin. Harry could see the truth. Something had hurt her soul enough that the strain was making it weaken and fray. No doubt worse, because she was apparently keeping it quiet. He narrowed his eyes and focused on the swirl of pulsing lights by the window, extending his power for the first time that evening in an idle flex to look. Jessica was tall and thin, skin tightly covering little muscle and barely any fat, her skeleton strong without weaknesses. Perhaps too thin. Harry was still new to observing the human bodies around him, and he sometimes saw deeper than he wished, beneath clothes and flesh to the hidden organs underneath. She was dressed in long pants and a sweater, odd choices for July. Her arms were crossed across her stomach, sitting hunched over on the window seat. As he looked, she shivered and held herself tighter, not the average response to the touch of his magic in a muggle. "Harry," Hermione asked softly, and he became aware that many of the conversations in the room had stopped. An unwelcome side effect to his look. It often spread out without his notice, touching on the others in a room with brushes of his power. As he had focused on Jessica, it had managed to cover most of the room with traces of emerald magic like odd splashes of paint by a careless artist. Harry withdrew it immediately, the natural colors of things instantly shining back through, the shadowy carpet floor with its green wooden tables and brown leather chairs, and the hues of people in it that he distinctly felt were looking at him. After the last few months of experimentation with his vision, all of the Dursley knew what the sensation of the look was, the rising energy and enthusiasm. But while Mr. and Mrs. Granger knew something of it, and magic both, Hermione's uncles and their families knew nothing of either. Blast it. Hermione's hand squeezed his, and Harry turned his face into her hair and whispered quickly in her ear. "Something is wrong with Jess. She's breaking, even as we speak." Conversations were haltingly starting back up again, the Grangers shaking off the odd sensation as perhaps a temporary malfunction in the AC, and the odd way the Potter teen had stared at their Jess, written off as a blind boy simply not knowing where he was looking. And surely his eyes had not been glowing, just a trick of the light. The Dursleys knew better. His aunt's voice had risen a bit too high in a laugh not quite real as she tried to draw attention back to herself and off of her nephew's odd behavior. Hermione leaned closer to him. "You're sure? Is that all you know?" Harry sighed. "Yes. Her body is healthy in every way I can see, only her soul pattern seems affected." Hermione breathed softly against him, quiet as her mind raced in thought before she seemed to come to some conclusion. "I'll be right back." With that, she pulled away and stood, moving towards Jess with purposeful intent, and soon after she reached her, Harry saw one crack widen and begin to split. Girl's voice rose, audible even where he sat across the room. "Nothing wrong with me. Jessica," her dad said sternly, his voice a mixture of embarrassed and confused at the near yell. Another crack. The girl was nearly panting with emotion. "Jessica," her mother now, questioning, pale light so similar to her daughter's moving closer, parents drawing into a protective circle, though they had no idea what was going on. Everyone was watching now. Harry saw Hermione's light dim and waver in uncertainty. He found himself standing, moving closer with careful movements, no guidance with his staff far away by the door. Jessica's pillar of light stomped 1 foot. "What is wrong with you guys? I told you to leave me alone. I didn't want to come to this stupid party anyway. Just leave me alone." Her voice rose to a new height, and to his dismay Harry saw from up close that the damage was more extensive than he had thought. pale purple swirls turning jagged and sharp and beginning to pull apart. He lost the thread of conversation, conscious only of that light, crumbling before his very eyes, a delayed reaction from some horrible blow in the past few days, on its way to looking like Luna's, and the few muggles he had seen in the college hallways that had the pattern of their consciousness broken and scarred over. Previously, he had thought such breaks must come about from great trauma, the death of a loved one in some horrible manner, a life-threatening illness, the shock of war. Some books even said that using dark magic would fracture one's soul, the killing curse in particular. But what could have happened to Jessica Granger, a 19-year-old girl in college herself, loving parents, good grades? Jessica, stop that right now. Stephen Granger's voice was rough with embarrassment and growing anger. That is no way to treat your cousin or your aunt and uncle. Even as Jessica's words grew angrier and louder, lashing out in return at her father, Harry saw her light fading in response to some terrible emotion, at odds with how anger normally affected the soul. "Stop," Harry said abruptly, and heard the unintended whip of power in his voice. The growing argument halted. Jessica sucked in a large breath, no doubt to turn her sharp tongue on him for interrupting her. Harry stepped closer, passing a frozen Hermione to stand closer to Jessica than was probably proper. She shrank back in unconscious reaction. "You're doing more harm than good," he said simply, speaking to both girl and father. "Something has gone wrong." Hermione's blue-violet light hovered closer at his shoulder, a hand grasping his arm. "Harry, I'm not sure," Stephen Granger spoke at the same time. "Young man, I'm very sorry for this scene during your birthday," but Harry shook his head sharply. "You need to fix this now, before it can't be fixed. She's falling apart." "What?" Jessica snapped. "What in heaven's name are you blabbering about now?" Harry pinned her lavender light with his gaze. "I'm talking about whatever happened to you in the last day or two that you are hiding from everyone who loves you, preventing them from helping you heal." She sucked in a breath, then began to wheeze, backing away. How do you know?" she demanded rigidly, her voice breaking. "Honey, what is he talking about?" her mother asked. Harry turned to Hermione and took her hand after a few clumsy grasps. He began to walk away, dragging her behind him. "Whatever it is, I don't need to know. Just tell someone before it ruins you," he said softly over his shoulder into the silence, determined to move away and give the panicked girl space. He didn't want to elevate the pressure on her when she was so close to breaking. "I'm already ruined," she whispered softly, and Harry heard his aunt ushering Dudley and the other cousins away with sharp words, clearing out the large living room with the efficiency of a mother used to rounding up eavesdropping boys. Harry paused at the door, looking back to where Jessica stood alone beside her worried parents, pale lavender between the deep purple of her father and the fuchsia tint of her mother. "Not as long as you don't let it break you." And with another sharp tug on Hermione's hand, he left the room. It was nearly 3 days later when Hermione approached him in the wide library of Grimmauld Place, her steps a familiar sound in his ears, the yellow of Creature on her heels with a metal tray bearing refreshments. The house. Elf had turned a new leaf with the destruction of the soul within the locket, and had been more than devoted when Harry gave the elf the silver necklace as a memento. He could see the pinpricks of metal about the elf's neck, and New Creature still wore the locket with devotion. It was a good thing jewelry did not count as clothes, or he would have been rewriting another contract, no doubt, though that needed doing regardless. Surely the elder elf, if he insisted on working, would enjoy better clauses binding his service. Hermione sat across from him, oddly silent as Creature placed ceramic mugs between them and disappeared. When she finally spoke, it was in a whisper. "Mum told me it was her student advisor. They've convinced her to press charges, though it will be her word against his. Times like this I wish that Muggles had Veritaserum." He felt a hard pang in his chest at that news. He slowly nodded, and at the encouragement, Hermione began speaking faster. "And healing potions, too, for that matter. And wards, and oh, Harry, we spend all this time working on new theories and challenging laws of science and magic when the world is suffering. I can understand a little of why wizards hid themselves away, but all the good we can do, surely it outweighs the evil. Surely we can find some way to come together. It's not the Dark Ages anymore, with superstition and witch hunts, especially when even then they did our kind little harm." Jay," just want to help somehow." Her words ended with a fractured sob. Harry stood, his chair scraping back with a loud noise, rounding the table quickly to sink onto his haunches beside her, gathering her into his arms. Against his shoulder, she shook her head with sudden anger. "I hate feeling helpless. Worse, I hate being able to help, and yet being prohibited from doing so. When I think of what we could do to fix the world." She pulled away, and Harry looked down at her to see that whatever tears she had cried were gone, replaced with firm determination. "That's what I want to do, Harry. I don't want to just be Viola James, talking theory and magic in papers. I want to find a way to help the Muggle world, too. Find a way to help them accept magic for what it is, the answer we've all been looking for." Harry smiled, and felt an answering drive catching in his own heart at the fire in her voice. "We'll find a way, then. Between you and me, we'll find a way." And if his gaze ever fell on the man who raped Hermione's cousin, he would be strongly tempted to develop a new skill in breaking souls himself. The summer break seemed over as fast as it had begun, and classes resumed like the inevitable change of the seasons. Hermione began to carry her things to Grimmauld Place to study after classes, copying Harry's movements from the year before. But more often than not, it was not their classes or new magical theories that they spoke of. It was the nature of magic and science itself, and between the two of them, a plan began to form. It would take years, years of planning, studying, networking. It might even be impossible. The Ministry, if it got wind of it before they were ready, would surely retaliate. Or worse, the Iqua, the entity made to regulate the use of magic to ensure no Muggle could ever discover their society. But that was the genius of the plan. So many things Muggles did seemed like magic already. Many wizards and witches did not even realize just how far technology had come, nearly to the point of being more efficient than magic in some cases. But not beyond it, not yet. Hermione was the first to speak of how it could be done, discovering magic with science, introducing it as some element or compound or force, something Muggles could understand and study, and not even consider to be something as superstitious as magic. Harry was the one to think of the theory of relativity and how it might be reconciled with quantum mechanics. The thought that not all of the discovered elements in the theory were in place, that maybe magic itself was what was missing. "We'll start a company," Hermione whispered to him as they leaned against each other on the frayed rug in Grimmauld Place, a fire roaring in front of them tended by Creature. "Start with pharmaceuticals, maybe. Genetically modified plants that are not modified at all, introducing magical specimens under the very nose of the Ministry. Concentrated serums from these organisms in order to cure the common cold, or influenza, or cancer. Shots that can heal muscle tears and repair bones. Potions made on a large scale and simply called medicine. Who would ever suspect its magic in the beginning will just be entrepreneurs." It was late. She should have gone home over an hour before. But planning and dreaming had made them lose track of time, sharing thoughts between them on how it could be. Papers were scattered behind them, flow charts and graphs, ideas and strategies for the future. Harry ran a hand through her soft, curly hair, the heat of the fire causing static to spark between them. "And we can contract with the government privately," he murmured back. "Truth serums, new drugs to use in interrogations before they become mainstream, provide us a measure of security, political power." She wrinkled her nose. He felt it against his shoulder and knew she didn't like the idea, but she nodded anyway. "And then when everyone accepts it, we do more and more spectacular things. The whole world will be using our inventions. Progress, they'll call it. Science. It is science." Harry responded with a smile, watching the red lights of fire swirl and spark, and eat hungrily at the green wood burning beneath it. One pattern fueling another, green life going still before it made the life of the fire burn more brightly. Yellow light came and went, Creature bringing hot chocolate from the kitchen and hovering at the door as he liked to do, listening in on them, watching for even a hint of something to do. Perhaps the elf would at least like a companion. Surely he grew bored simply bringing them food and cleaning Grimmauld Place. "What do you think will happen if the Ministry catches on?" Hermione asked softly, after a moment had passed. Harry squeezed her gently where she lay against his side. "Depends on when they find out. Try to stop us, I imagine, if it's early enough. If it's not, hold endless meetings where they agonize over the imminent destruction of our culture by Muggles." pass around a lot of paperwork, and send their drones to every ministry in the world to share in the terror of the thought. Hermione laughed, but he could still feel the tension in her shoulders. Harry sighed. Nothing that's worth doing comes without risk. I don't have to give you examples from history on that score. We won't really know what they'll do until it happens. All we can do is move forward and prepare for any scenario. Hermione's chin tilted up at him. He glanced down into moving blue-violet light, beautiful constellations of color in moving streams. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst, she said with a smile in her voice. He smiled in return and gently leaned forward to meet her face with his own. When college let out for the winter, his aunt made it plain that just like any college student away from home, he was expected to return to Surrey for a few days of family company at the least. Within a day, he was thinking fondly of his lab. Within 3 days, he even missed Creature and his incessant demand for ways to serve the master. His aunt had redecorated. Harry expended far too much energy the first afternoon looking about and memorizing the new placement of the living room chairs and end tables. She had placed a large plastic tree before the wide-flamed windows, its black shadowy leaves highlighted with pricks of metal ornaments and electric lights. When the first strand burned out under his gaze, Harry was commanded to reduce his use of magic until after Christmas. Dudley brought his steady girlfriend of 2 years to dinner, the local police inspector's daughter, a short magenta pattern who preferred to be called Bee instead of Beatrice, which she claimed was stuffy. Harry had never spent much time in her company before, and after doing so was glad of it. Bee was, in one word, bubbly. Her energy practically frothed from her like an incessant fountain, a colorful display that threatened to give him a headache. For a Muggle, her soul was a bright beacon of happiness. Harry was sorely tempted to ask if she had magical ancestors, but to do so would cause awkward questions he doubted Dudley would appreciate. Hermione, beside him at the dinner table, slipped her hand inside his own, and Harry relaxed at the touch, looking over at the much more calm light next to him. He smiled at her, feeling her hand squeeze his in response. For the next hour, he kept his hand in contact with her light, whether her hand, her side, her waist, and each touch made the family dinner a great deal more pleasant. And he tried very hard to ignore Dudley's snicker at his admittedly lovesick actions. 1997, when he returned to Grimmauld Place, after nearly a week with the Dursleys, Harry took a deep breath and bathed in the silence. As much as he loved his aunt, her constant motion, either cooking, cleaning, or spying on the neighbors through the drapes along with constant commentary, had worn him down. Having gotten used to being alone, the activity within the Dursley house had been unwelcome. He liked the order of his own home. Did that make him crotchety? Master is home. Creature's high voice came from down the hallway, and Harry smiled to see the yellow drifting closer from the kitchen. He tossed his outer cloak onto the rack, his gloves left on the entrance table as he gratefully toed off his orange dragonhide boots. Finally, Happy New Year, Creature, he said, and passed the house, elf as he strode towards his room. Can Creature get yous anything? The elf's voice followed him along with the light patter of feet on hardwood. No. Harry replied over his shoulder before ascending the steps 2 at a time. Is Master sure? The house elf was following him, and there was an odd note of desperation in his voice. Harry frowned and paused at the top of the stair. Are you all right? The elf shifted on his feet. A loose floorboard creaked in the silence. Harry looked at him with a gentle extension of green power and saw an elf slumped slightly, ears drooping. But before he could comment, like a flower blooming in the sun, Creature straightened his shoulders and raised his chin, body nearly vibrating with energy. His energy. Creature is most fine now, Master Potter, the house elf said, the sudden cheer in his voice at odds with the previous pleading words he had spoken. Wait, Harry said, as the yellow swirled in the beginnings of teleportation. What do you mean now? Creature hesitated, fingers absently clasping each other against his chest. Creature is very glad Master has returned. Harry frowned. You looked off until just now. The house elf shifted on his feet and the floor creaked again. Creature missed the Master's eyes the most. The elf finally said, his voice defiant, as if the admission was going to cost him something. Harry tensed, a suspicion niggling at the back of his mind. My eyes. The elf nodded with quick jerks of his head, speaking faster, warming to the topic. Yes, Master. Master looks at Creature sometimes, and Master makes Creature feel young and strong again. Creature missed the look. Harry, at that last word, withdrew his power with a snap, the defined features of his house. Elf becoming yellow and blurred again, a smaller splash of color against the familiar walls of Grimmauld Place. He knew his look had an effect on others. In animals, it was usually fear. In muggles, increased energy levels during the duration of the look, usually focused on some task that was enjoyable or pressing. In magical people, the effect was skewed if the people he was looking at recognized himself as the source of energy. They were either afraid or uncomfortable to be touched by foreign magic in such a way. He hadn't thought to test long-term effects of daily exposure to his own energy, and had done no testing at all on its effect on magical creatures like house elves. He had rather thought it was probable they would react like people or animals according to their level of sentience. But Creature sounded like he not only enjoyed the sensation of his energy, but actively sought it out. It would certainly explain why the elf was so eager to please the last few months, and that, more than anything, raised warning flags in his mind. I see. Thank you for telling me, Harry said simply, and turned away, hearing the elf pop out behind him. In his room, he closed the door and sat on his bed, looking down at his feet as his mind raced. He had to do more tests immediately. He had to know if it was simply because Creature was a house elf or a magical creature, or if it was the frequency of looks he received. He had to come up with a way to stop Creature from relying on the energy boost of his own power in any way. Was the work too much to handle? Most of all, he really needed to talk to Hermione. How does it feel when I look at you? Harry asked straight out, as soon as he finished describing how Creature had acted and spoken. Hermione bit her lip, fidgeting in her chair in the library, trying to decide how to describe the feeling. Well, it's not unpleasant, she began, then shook her head. Actually, unpleasant is far from how I would describe it. I can tell right away your magic just touches my own. She stopped again, looking out the window as people walked by on the street. How to say it? It's doubly warm. It makes my heart beats faster, kind of like a hug or your fingers on my skin, and it makes me feel safe. And loved, very loved. Like you've put a mark on me that says I'm yours. Hermione tossed her head and shifted in her seat. I do feel a rush of energy, but I don't feel particularly stronger, and the sensation fades as soon as you look away. Though she wouldn't mind if he did it more often. She could sympathize with Creature in that desire. Harry sighed. I talked to him more this morning, and I can't help but draw correlations between what he feels and what an addict feels. He admitted he is tired a lot, and that taking care of Grimmauld Place takes a toll. He's been using the energy bursts to do some of the cleaning and cooking. That would certainly explain why Hermione noticed the house was not as clean as Hogwarts. He had figured the house elf just disliked completely spotless homes after living in a decade of filth, or perhaps had just lost his knack for it. But knowing that the elf had struggled instead made her feel mildly guilty for all the times she had pointed out a dusty bookshelf. Does he want to retire? Surely house elves had some sort of retirement. They couldn't work forever. House elves don't retire. Their contract is until death. Harry's voice was grim. Hermione straightened in outrage. What? That's preposterous. Harry's face twisted in distaste. I know, but Creature won't even talk of renegotiating his contract with me without going into hysterics. I think I'm going to have to purchase another house elf to help around here. Hermione lifted her chin. Absolutely not. If their contracts are that horrible, someone should do something. It's inhumane. Harry leaned his head back in a stretch, letting out a long breath before he straightened. I know. The wizarding world has a distinct lack of civil rights for many magical creatures, but there is not much we can do about it now. Hermione folded her arms. If Creature can't handle the workload because he is old, then make him younger. Harry's body tensed. She saw even his fingers tighten on the armrest. What? Hermione met eyes that did not focus on her own. I've helped you write out your notes on the tests done on the soul sliver. You implied there was a noticeable difference between young and old patterns. If you can see that difference, it stands to reason you can change one pattern to another. Harry moved uneasily, and his gaze dropped to the floor. Hermione, one look into his guilty face, and she huffed in sudden realization. You've already done some testing on age reversal. At the accusation, Harry shrank in his chair. Hermione leapt to her feet and stomped the 5 feet that separated them. Harry James Potter. I'm sorry. Harry yelped at her angry tone. At the time, after how upset you were over the soul, and then after everything was going so well. And I just... Stop before you dig the hole deeper, Hermione demanded. You know how important it is to document all tests for future experiments. In leaving me out of it, we could have lost valuable data. Harry raised his hands in supplication. I haven't done anything in nearly a year. Since before Creature gave me the locket to practice on. I got enough to draw some basic conclusions, but I hit a dead end. Hermione, after a second's contemplation, gingerly slid into his lap, rewarded by his frustrated face twisting into surprise and distracted pleasure. His hands hesitated a moment over her shoulders before settling there. You've got all those experiments put away in that mind of yours, and I want you to tell me about them and why you are reluctant to try making Creature younger. She spoke softly to him, her own hands on his chest. I'll have a new perspective and might see something you missed. Harry sighed, his chest rising and falling under her hands. He pressed her closer, and Hermione turned into his side, cuddling down in the chair like it was made for two people instead of one, her legs swung across his own. His arm wrapped around her shoulder, and his breath ruffled her hair softly. You're going to be somewhat disappointed in me, he admitted finally, and Hermione shook her head. You have a reason for everything you do, even if I disagree. Disagreement is not disappointment. Harry snorted, then ran one hand up and down her arm, as if to calm an anxious cat. I tested on animals. Well, maybe she could be disappointed a little. Hermione's heart sank. More than anything else, she hated animal testing in any of its forms, a fact he was well aware of. Animals could not give consent, and the only thing she had found more horrifying than Muggle animal labs was the potential that transfigured animals were aware when magical students practiced on them, twisting and sometimes killing their bodies. Animals had no rights in the wizarding world, from the smallest mouse to the largest Abraxas. Go on, she whispered, and Harry's arms tightened. Then he reluctantly began to speak, in dry clinical terms. I started with a Columba livia domestica, a species of street pigeon eye obtained from outside. Standard pale blue bird pattern. I practiced quickening first. Hermione closed her eyes, resting against his side as he spoke, and tried not to think about the fact that in order to bring something to life, you had to kill it first, and that Harry would not, as any scientist would not, be content with doing an experiment once. It had to be replicated, which meant Harry had killed a defenseless animal over and over. And somehow, to her, that thought was worse than knowing he had split a human soul into strands of light to see how its personality was structured. He had to know. Hermione reminded herself, we both have to know. But at that moment, she would almost rather not. Hermione spent a week of her free time before classes resumed on organizing a new folder, binders of crisp white paper rapidly filling with notes and untested hypotheses, along with what experiments had failed. Harry had not just practiced on one pigeon. He had tested quickening on several different species of mammals as well, mostly stray cats or dogs with the odd owl thrown in, as well as a wide variety of plants. Enough to confirm that death in an animal body was a temporary state, able to be reversed with the right pattern restoration. Not enough, however, to confirm if the animals once quickened retained the same personality as before. In plants, quickening usually resulted in new growth, buds or leaves forming from a branch or stalk, not necessarily the restoration of the old growth. But in his experiments with making old patterns young again, the results had been erratic at best, and at worst a total failure. It doesn't seem to make medical sense, Harry told her as she sat at her own designated desk in the wide library. The old pattern's light simply moves slower, though its heart might beat at the same rate as a younger specimen. When I speed up that life seems to wear out the body at an exponential rate. Mere days, in some cases, and they die. The only way to truly revert them appears to be to change not only the speed or age of their light, but to also revert the old pattern to a new pattern, an entirely younger body. And I couldn't do that properly without first killing the pattern, making the dead body younger, then quickening it at a younger speed. Hermione tapped her pen on the desk, brows drawn together in thought. So, we have two elements at work in plants, the light of its life, and then an ageless genus pattern. In animals, three elements, the light of its life which slows with age, its genus pattern that is set for its species with color, and the age of its genus pattern, which seems to be manipulated by various geometric shapes. Harry nodded, and Hermione continued. Then, in humans, 4 elements: light displaying life and at times emotion, the genus pattern whose soulless base is white, the age pattern of the body in shapes, and then the soul, which has unique color but also unique shapes. Harry smiled, shaking his head with a laugh. Humans are nearly impossible to categorize. Not only are their lights unique, but so are their shapes, and those shapes age at different rates than everyone else. Even thinking about de-aging a human pattern permanently seems impossible without risking accidentally changing them into someone else while doing it. Hermione only turned a page and made another notation above a simple chart she had drawn. That's why we're starting simple with animals. No added soul to factor in alongside unique geometric shapes. She frowned down at the paper. Though it bothers me to think that magical creatures have no unique souls when they obviously have unique personalities. So do animals, for that matter. I guess I always subscribe to the idea that everyone deserves a heaven to go to when they die. I'm not sure the afterlife is heaven, Harry countered, or even a place at all. He stared off into the distance, eyes shuttered in thought. And just because humans have unique souls that go somewhere else does not mean that magical creatures and animals do not have unique consciousness. I've long wondered what happens to that consciousness when I change the pattern, and whether these younger patterns will have the same memories as the old one. I'm changing their brains, Hermione. I don't realistically know how that won't make them an entirely new person. Hermione put her pen down and sighed. I know. I want to say magic can solve it all, but magic is still science, still follows rules. Changing the brain in any way will affect things. Have you looked into specific patterns for different parts of a body, changing everything but the brain? Harry wilted where he stood. I've thought about it, but I can't at this point. I see barely any difference in individual body parts from the outside, as they all make up the body pattern together. In order to do so, he paled, but continued. I would have to observe each individual organ and bone separately while it was alive to see how it fit into the pattern. And not only once, but for every animal I thought about de-aging. It would be rediscovering the entire human and animal body by myself and memorizing each individual part of a pattern. And not every specimen's organs and flesh would be the same. The vast scope of it would require years dedicated solely to that one task. Duplicating known patterns is easy, but changing them, it requires far more knowledge of individual portions. It's not an easy fix. Hermione closed the notebook and straightened the desk, her hands moving restlessly as she tried to turn the problem over in her mind. You created a dragon from stone without that kind of knowledge. How? Harry leaned over her desk, black hair falling across his face as he answered. Easily. For one, it was not alive. It was fueled by my own power, which after the fact was not the best use of magic in a duel, as it exhausted me within minutes. I simply took the pattern of the dragon I faced at the tournament, which was a very unique genus pattern that was easy to memorize, and forced that pattern onto the stone underneath my feet, which gave it the color of stone but the pattern of a dragon. It wasn't very neat work, but I was a bit distracted. As soon as I stopped fueling it, however, it fell apart back into stone. A dragon cannot live with a stone body, even if every piece of the pattern is in place. If I had tried to quicken it to its own life, it would not have taken. Hermione hummed in agreement, looking up into Harry's face as he leaned over her. He seemed to be looking at her fingers, eyes flickering back and forth, but it was hard to tell. She smiled slightly. How about lunch? And we'll talk to Creature about at least giving this a try. If all else fails, we return him back to his current state and reconsider getting more help. Though she wouldn't hire a single elf without a contract that didn't equal modern slavery, she was certain Harry would agree with her on that score. He brightened. Deal. Creature hadn't hesitated to agree to be their test subject. Harry hadn't been certain if it was because the house elf wanted to be younger again, or because it meant Harry would be focusing a great deal of energy on him, and doubtless a great deal of looks. But by the second week of the new term, Harry stood in his laboratory with Hermione and told Creature to take a seat. Hermione had come up with what she hoped was a workable plan, after going through some of their previous notes on transfiguration and pattern manipulation. Harry had spent that time studying Creature's pattern until he was completely certain he could recreate him if something went direly wrong. He was the neon yellow of all house elves, but Creature's light was slightly slower than a younger elf's would be, and yet his magic was still strong. His pattern tended towards trapezoids and parallelograms, a mix of sharp angles and sloping lines over a short, spindly humanoid shape. And in his study of the old elf, Harry noticed something he never had before in quick glances. Underlying the yellow was much more subtle detail, an infinitesimal pattern within the larger hue. He wasn't sure if it was unique only to Creature and house elves, or if there was something similar in other magical creatures. Harry had made a mental note to study the phenomenon later once they were finished with their current project. Creature is ready, Master, the house elf declared, and Harry smiled before sitting down himself in another chair that had been placed in the room. Hermione began to speak to the magical quill. First test, February 7th, on house elf Creature at Grimmauld Place. Harry will temporarily stop the life in the subject, then attempt basic pattern changes regarding the shapes that make up a younger house elf body, based on observations of other house elves at the house elf registry office in Diagon Alley. When the new pattern is established, Harry will quicken Creature and adjust the speed of light to confirm his new youthful state, and then we will interview the house elf to see what, if any, memories or personality changes have taken place. As soon as Hermione stopped speaking, Harry's hands tightened around his staff, and he locked his gaze on Creature's pattern as it squirmed in the seat, legs swinging loosely in nervous anticipation. Then he made the pulse of light still. Hermione made an agonized sound behind him as the yellow pattern slumped down in its chair, nearly falling from the seat. He knew she hadn't liked the idea of what they were doing, regardless if it was for a good cause. He also knew that this was the first time she witnessed him kill a live being directly in this manner. Harry let out a breath and pushed how she might be feeling from his mind. It was time to get to work. He began to rearrange the pattern, a line here, another there, duplicating the lines of the younger patterns he had seen. He focused entirely on his task, even when he heard the door to the lab open and close again. When he was finished, he looked away. Hermione was gone. With a glance towards where a younger Creature lay sprawled, Harry strode to the door, frowning as he looked out into the hallway. Hermione's light approached, but it was dim with strong emotion. "Are you all right?" Harry questioned, and Hermione brushed past him to stand beside the quill. When she spoke, her voice was stiff. "The quill is still transcribing." In other words, she didn't want to talk about it. With another frown, Harry retook his place in the seat. "I've finished the de-aging process. Now I will quicken him. Time." Hermione's voice replied steadily. "It's been 1 hour and 15 minutes. More than he had suspected." With a nod, Harry flicked Creature's light into motion, a quick, lively beat of health and strength. The elf jerked, jumping from its chair, which clattered to the ground. Harry held his breath as Creature floundered for a second. Then his elf's voice began to speak in the same hissing tone he had used when he first came upon them over a year before. "Intruders, how dare you invade the Master's house?" Hermione's light, already weak, dimmed further in disappointment. Harry spoke quickly as he saw magic rising in the small figure. "Who is your master?" The elf raised its hands in indignation, magic sparking like live yellow fire in its palms. "Master Orion Black." Before the spell could be cast, Harry stopped the elf's light, and the Creature fell to the wooden floor with an unpleasant crunch. Harry winced and heard Hermione groan. Harry cleared his throat. "Experiment has failed." Body regression appears successful, but subject lost at least 1 to 2 decades of memory. I will now return Creature to his original older form. Deactivate. Hermione snapped, and Harry heard the quill clatter to the table it and parchment had been placed upon. "I'll be outside when you're done." Before he could ask what was wrong, the door was closing behind her. Harry sighed, taking a moment to lean back in his chair, an ache developing in both his neck and his bottom from sitting so long already in one position. Then he looked at Creature dead on the floor and set about putting him to rights again. 2 hours later, Harry found her light curled up on his bed, a green sheet thrown over her legs. "We'll try again," he said softly, uncertain if she was asleep. "I know." She wasn't. He walked closer, sitting on the edge of the mattress. "Will you tell me what's wrong?" It was a moment of silence. Then a hand touched his own, fingers twining with his. Just another difference in what we see, I think. It was very disturbing to watch you tear apart and transfigure skin and bone before threading it back together. Threw up. Her voice jerked. Harry sucked in a breath and swung his legs over, laying down so they were face to face. I'm sorry. I didn't think what the process might look like to you. He felt the bed move as she shook her head, blue-violet light shifting. I'm fine. I just don't do well with bee-blood, not after. The tea-troll. She growled the last, and her hand tightened on his. It's silly, and I feel stupid for responding that way. I'm not going to stop watching the experiments, so don't even say it. Harry snapped his mouth closed. He had been about to suggest just that. I'll get used to it. This is part of science. It's not all clean and magical. Sometimes it's messy. Is Creature all right? Harry reached out with his other hand until he felt her warm shoulder, then ran it down her back with soft motions as he replied. He's fine. A bit disappointed to still be old and wrinkly. She laughed sharply, then shifted until he felt her breath against his cheek. Soft skin touched his own, and his vision narrowed until all he saw was the beautiful shades of her pattern. Despite the situation, he very much wanted to roll her on top of him and bathe in her light. He was very aware of the fact that they were in his bed, a situation he had never been in before, and one he was probably enjoying far too much. Then Hermione's face rubbed softly against his own, and he felt the drying liquid on her face, smelled the salt of tears. All thoughts of sex were pushed to the back of his mind, far less urgent than the fact that his Viola was feeling wretched. Harry pulled her closer and held her against him, her hair falling over one hand, the other clasped tightly with hers as he whispered in her ear. It was just the initial experiment. We'll try our other ideas, one a week for the next 2 months as we planned. If they all fail, then we get another elf. I'm not sure I even want to succeed. When Hermione jerked in his arms, Harry made a sound of amusement. I don't want to make something live forever. It seems like a big responsibility, being the fountain of youth. I have enough unique abilities on my hands to last me a lifetime. Her mouth lifted in a reluctant smile against his neck. You're probably right. We're going to try anyway, though. Yep, Harry said, and laughed in earnest. If the possibility exists, I have to know, even if I regret it. I'm sure every scientist who discovers something of magnitude feels somewhat the same, like your idol. Hermione had begun to refer to Albert Einstein, the German physicist whose work Harry studied so thoroughly, as that. Harry rather hoped he was his role model instead. If he had half of the intuitive and insightful nature Einstein had, surely he would see much more clearly in solving his own problems. But then again, Einstein was still just a man. He had no doubt struggled just as much with his own discoveries, and also with what they had brought to light. One simple equation that had eventually led to the creation of a weapon whose scope was far greater than anything that the wizarding world had ever created. Harry strongly felt that even fiendfire was inferior to a muggle atomic bomb. Hermione yawned and relaxed. After a moment's thought, Harry grabbed the pattern of the green blanket under him and pulled it out to settle it over them both. Just a short nap, Hermione murmured to the pillow. Harry lay his arm back over her shoulders, breathing in her unique scent with a pleased sound. Okay. All of the experiments failed. By the time March came to an end and April began, both Harry and Hermione were sick of testing anything at all on Creature, who, while patient, was still just as needy of Harry's energy as he had been at the beginning. Harry liked being used a drug even less than the thought of being a pseudo-youth elixir. We've done all we can do, he told Hermione with a slashing gesture towards the notebook in her hands. There's nothing left to try, unless you're ready to do invasive experiments on his inner organs. He didn't have to see her light pulse in agitation to know that thought disturbed her a great deal. While she hadn't gotten sick during any of the other experiments they had done, she obviously didn't like them any better regardless. Who could blame her? We'll go to the registry office after the end of the school year then and start searching for a reasonable house elf contract, she said, and arms of light waved erratically. I have to start studying for finals on the weekends. Then we're agreed to close this project, she sighed, but walked to the desk and dropped the book on it with a thump. Yes, temporary findings is that memories and personality are directly related to a pattern's age. She paused, and he felt her gaze on him. You're aware that this probably won't apply to humans. If the soul contains the consciousness and is a separate element, it could reasonably be taken from an old body and put into a new one, just like the silver of Valdemar you destroyed. He grimaced. Yes, I don't feel like testing it, though. She sniffed. Believe it or not, human testing isn't regulated in the wizarding world as long as consent is obtained. The rules are far more lax than in the Muggle world, where they actually care enough about people's lives to ensure things are done properly. Harry snorted in response. Until the Ministry finds out we're doing experiments on souls, magic relating to souls is considered dark magic and therefore illegal. Hermione sighed. I know. I can understand why, even if I don't completely agree with it. You have to research somehow. You can, Harry returned. If you work with the unspeakables and never share your findings with anyone but the Ministry. She laughed, walking closer to hook her arm with his as they left the library. And we both know that will never happen. I firmly believe knowledge shouldn't be kept secret. Harry raised a brow. That's not true. You think we should keep the full extent of my abilities secret. Her fingers pinched him. That's not the same. Harry rubbed the painful spot and grinned. Hypocrite. Her light danced closer to his, and he jumped away in response before one hand could swat his head. I am not, she sniffed. Selfish. The only person who can hide knowledge is me. Her voice was amused. Harry laughed. That's the definition of a hypocrite in one sentence. Congratulations. She lunged for him, and he dodged, heading for the kitchen at a run with a quick look for obstacles. Come back here, she demanded behind him, laughter making the command nothing more than a friendly suggestion. Harry's smile widened. He jumped around Creature and headed through the kitchen. Make me. He tossed the words over one shoulder. Oh, I will. Her voice was full of determination. He had enough time to see the green and orange of her wand in one hand. Then his world became blue-violet, and he stumbled to a stop. The fiend had cast a wordless bubblehead charm on him. When had she practiced wordless incantations? Now, what am I going to do with you? Her voice came closer, satisfied, and Harry was too thrilled to even bother dispelling the charm. He smiled, blind as a bat in broad daylight. He certainly hoped that whatever she decided to do it lasted a long time. We're ready, my lord, Crouch said in soft, eager tones. Behind him, hundreds of eyes glowed in the darkness with pale fire. Tom Riddle turned, adjusting the sleeve on his long robe over his wand holster. He met the fervent eyes of his closest adviser, saw the madness there in the too bright gaze. He glanced at his other Death Eaters, assembled like a group of young wizards about to pull some elaborate prank. Excitement with just a hint of fear. Fear of a 16-year-old boy who may or may not have been prophesied to stop him. A boy who had spelled his own defeat not once but twice. The savior of the wizarding world. They knew the roads he traveled, and the Muggle conveyance that often carried him. The Aurors who guarded him were easily followed from one warded location to another. The Ministry, so diligent in protecting and watching their savior that they did not watch their own backs. Riddle would see how the boy and only 2 guards fared against the Inferi. Harry, leaning back in the passenger seat, saw the wall of magic coalesce in front of them. Stop! He yelled and jerked forward against the seatbelt as his uncle stomped on the brakes of the automobile, the tires shrieking in protest. But they still hit that wall, the front of the car crumpling, metal collapsing. From behind them, cars honked in confusion. Harry blinked, and the wall that had crushed the front hood disappeared, leaving behind something else. God help us, his uncle said hoarsely, and Harry hissed a question. What do you see? What Harry saw was impossible, the blank white of human cadavers, too many to count, a legion of death. How had no one noticed? PP people, they're staring at us. It's hard to tell in the dark. They don't look right, they aren't right. It was supposed to be dark. The sun had set hours ago, before his uncle had picked him up from Grimmauld Place after a long day at the office. Stay here, lock the doors, Harry said to his uncle, and didn't protest when he heard the man rapidly dialing some number on his cell phone. He opened his door and slipped out, holding his staff in one hand. Behind him, on the sidewalk, the 2 Aurors who had been following above them on brooms rapidly approached, one landing beside him with a quick clap of boots on asphalt. Mr. Potter, come with us now. You are in great danger. What are they? He asked, eyes never leaving the horde of white ahead of him. Inferi. Climb aboard and we will take you to safety. Inferi. Dead bodies enchanted to life with dark magic. He didn't doubt if he was closer he would see the stamp of black magic hidden in the shining white of each corpse. Inferi, who would kill anything in their path, possessing 10 times the strength and speed of a normal person. Why hadn't they attacked yet? What's going on here? Angry shouts came from behind them, people leaving their cars. The street hadn't been busy, but at least 3 cars had been behind them, perhaps more. A young voice called out over the agitated murmurs. That man has a broom and a pointy hat, the aura cursed. Now, Mr. Potter, the longer we wait. And the rest, he asked softly. Who will protect my uncle and the muggles here? It can't be helped. They could attack at any moment. The aura's voice was urgent. Above them, the second aura twirled his broom in a circle, scanning the scene below. What are they waiting for? Harry asked, ignoring the man's extended blue hand. Who knows, please? The white parted, and from the middle a pattern he was familiar with, intimately familiar with, appeared. A pattern he had captured and killed and quickened and shredded and rebuilt and finally destroyed. Not another bloody, broken Voldemort. The aura hissed in a breath. Harry saw him swing his leg over the green light of his broom. Bringing reinforcements, then. Harry said casually, even as the aura cursed, and lifted off the ground with a shout up to his companions above. It's you-know-who. Is someone hurt? What's going on? Who are these people? The angry muggle voice from behind approached closer, no doubt trying to squint in the darkness. Get back in your cars, Harry said, beginning to walk towards where the blood-red pattern of Voldemort waited. These men are armed. He heard the muggle curse, and his alarmed shouts to the others. No doubt in minutes the police would be arriving, thanks to his uncle. He was standing in the middle of an incident that would keep a dozen obliviators busy when they finally arrived. Harry held his staff tight in one hand as he approached, and a voice called to him from the pattern ahead. Harry Potter, I've come to kill you. Wasn't that much obvious already? Harry stopped a few paces away, frowning at the broken wizard. How many of you are there? This makes 3 I've encountered so far. Voldemort laughed, a high shriek of cold humor. You'll never know, Potter. Other patterns were coming, and among them was the grey taint of Crouch Jr., who he had faced at the tournament. The remaining Death Eaters the Ministry had been searching for, all lined up and ready, wands shining in their hands. Why come after me? Harry said quietly, burning for some sort of answer. Is it because I've defeated you before? Voldemort's red light flickered, and Harry looked at him, seeing the man's angry serpentine face for a brief moment before withdrawing his power. He would need all he had when the men attacked. 5 wizards and an innumerable amount of inferi. No wonder the auras had gotten on their brooms. He wouldn't be surprised if they outright fled to the ministry. Only minutes had passed, and it would probably take at least 10 more for the auras to reassemble and return in force. If Harry left, none of the people here would stand even one of those minutes. Collateral, the Death Eaters assumed, correctly, that Harry wouldn't leave them defenseless. He tightened both his hands on his staff and held it in front of him as Voldemort spoke. Why? Is the fact that you are a thorn in my side not enough? The inferi began to move, silently circling him, spreading out, no breath sounding in his ears, only the scuffs of feet moving across the cracked road. Or that you killed me twice before. Or that people claim you are greater than me. Another minute passed. The Death Eaters were growing restless with their masters gloating, their lights flickering, heads turning up to the sky. They at least knew that the ministry would be soon arriving. In the distance, he heard a siren. Or maybe I simply want to see you die, and not even at my own hand. I'll enjoy watching my army tear you apart and consume the pieces. Harry closed his eyes. He didn't need them. He heard the Dark Lord laugh, the nervous chuckles of the wizards behind him, the many sounds of multiple bodies moving on all sides of him, waiting for the command to attack. He had no time to wait, and really, what was the point? Inferi had a weakness, a large one that he would be happy to use. Really, the Dark Lord should have rethought his idea of an army that could only attack physically and only defend themselves with brute strength and bare flesh. Kill him. Voldemort hissed as white light gathered to strike as one. Potter, he heard the shout from above, a single aura in the sky screaming a warning. Harry smiled, tilting his head back, his mind expanding to see the patterns gathered around him, white humans with no souls, no life other than the red-black fuel in their veins that tied them to Voldemort's will. Human patterns, empty cadavers, who could not bear the touch of fire. Fiendful. Harry breathed, his own green light growing in strength, pooling into the red staff in his hands, Phoenix song singing its exultant counterpart. The flame patterns gathered about him, as white as the inferi, but burning, hot, untamable. It rose in the shape of a phoenix, wide wings spread wide, long tail streaming behind it, flames wreathing its form like a shining halo. Voldemort screamed in rage as it fell upon the inferi, consuming with single-minded purpose, white becoming white. Human patterns changed to fire in less than a moment, a blink of the eye, a phoenix of wild heat and hunger that raged among them. Harry saw it take two of the Death Eaters in its flight, saw Voldemort's red strength rise and hold its first strike at bay, the grey light of Crouch huddled behind his master. The phoenix was singing, or perhaps it was only his staff, humming under his fingers at the sheer amount of power being channeled through it. One Death Eater came for him, dodging flames and raising his wand to strike. Harry made the wizard's pale red light stop with death, the human pattern falling to the ground as the rusty soul rose to disappear at the loss of its body. More and more inferi came. His phoenix ate them whole, its form grown so large now that it wrapped around him, fiery feathers falling to liquid flame that raced across the bare ground. He heard screams from behind, men and women fleeing from the wild flames. The sirens screeched, police boots hitting the ground. He smelled burning flesh and clothing. The formerly cool night air turned to stinging heat. Sweat gathered on his brow, the fiendfare pulling at his own power, threatening to break from his control as it had long ago while testing the spell at Hogwarts, running out of targets to consume and turning its wild eyes to wide destruction of the buildings around and the cars behind. "I'll kill you," Voldemort screamed, one slash of his wand turning the phoenix aside to fall upon one of the last Death Eaters left, who had turned to flee. The Dark Lord strode toward him, wand alight with curses about to come free. Harry looked at the wizard's wand and made green wood and orange dragon essence into tan cotton string, falling limp in the man's hand. Voldemort screamed, and wandless black spells rose from his scarlet form, daggers in the air to pierce him. From the side, grey light sprang, a wand in another wizard's hand, Crouch attacking as one with his master. Harry jumped back, and with a slow, angry beat of his heart, took their souls and tore them in two. Crouch screamed, falling to the ground with the same horrified sound that the locket had made when he tried to make it something other than itself. Voldemort did not fall. The broken pattern, frayed and tattered, split and seemed to hang, clinging to the body it inhabited, a poor fit after all. The wizard cried out, struggling to remain conscious, and Harry took hold of the two souls and tore them again, slowing the life-giving pulse of life to the stillness of death. He watched the grey of Crouch fade away, broken by Harry's hand into multiple parts that each disappeared one by one, the unbroken white body left behind, crumpled on the ground. Voldemort went to his knees, and Harry looked at him, saw eyes wide and still, orbs in a skull that no longer held consciousness inside of it. The red of his soul, broken too many times over, shattered and gleaming like fallen pieces of a mirror. The wizard fell forward limply, and the phoenix fiend turned and sang to fall upon them. Harry seized the white fire pattern, and with a wrench turned it to a water pattern and hue instead. The heat of flames changed at once to cooling mist that fell in soft droplets of blue haze. Harry turned, looking around. The Death Eaters and inferi alike were all dead. What the fire had not eaten lay strewn about in white pieces, melted bodies and limbs randomly placed in a macabre pattern. The buildings that lined the street appeared untouched, and his fire had never reached the cars on either side of the battle, though the empty one nearby looked fairly twisted. He looked at Voldemort again, the man fallen face down on the ground. Something caught his eye, a pattern he had never seen before, a hole on the hand of the dead white body. But it wasn't a hole, it wasn't a shadow either, it was light, a light that did not shine, a light made of shadows, something that made no sense and correlated with nothing he had ever seen before. Harry knelt, looking closer at the body, and saw the shadowlight attached to a ring, one made of a gold alloy, the sharp crispness of its pattern enveloped by the odd pattern that rested within a stone inside it. He reached out and pulled the ring from the dark wizard's body, then stood, looking down at it in his hand. Had it something to do with the inferi, or the reason yet another part of Voldemort had attained a new body, or something else entirely? The non-light of the stone marked him, triangular patterns of bright shadow, an impossibility he could not explain. Harry. His uncle called cautiously, and Harry slipped the ring into his pocket, turning again to see his uncle standing next to two men wearing the pinpricks of metal badges, policemen. Mr. Potter. The second aura, who had called his warning from above, landed beside him, tall broom in hand. He heard the policeman cursing, his uncle trying to explain haphazardly what was going on. More auras will be here in moments. We'll handle the muggles. Harry only looked at him, his hair growing wet and sticking to his damp skin in the mist. How will you explain this? The aura wouldn't look at his face. The man's head was turned down and away. Oh, standard obliviation spells mostly, not much explanation necessary. Perhaps a car explosion or something of the sort. A wreck, even. His voice was nervous. Harry withdrew his power and leaned against his staff with a long sigh, the exhaustion of changing so many patterns finally beginning to take its toll. He was getting stronger. A year ago, he would not have been able to handle so much magic as easily. Harry saw light explode around them, multiple auras apparating in, the light of their souls bringing a multitude of colors into the shadowy street, wands held in front of them at the ready as the core held their formation, and the exterior ranks rolled to the side to avoid any potential enemy fire. The Muggle police cursed again, but were soon silenced by a spell as the auras took in the situation. "Not my uncle," Harry called out hastily, moving towards the large Dursley. "He's with me." "Of course, Mr. Potter," one of the closest auras quickly said, backing away at his approach as if he had been confronted with a dragon. Harry realized abruptly that all the auras were keeping their distance, talking in low tones as they moved around the street. When he reached his uncle, the older man hesitantly asked if he was all right. "Yeah," Harry said simply, and looked over the auras. When each one's form that his light made whole glanced over at him in turn, he saw the way they quickly looked away, hunching their shoulders at the touch of his energy like whipped dogs. Harry sighed again, shaking his head as he stared blankly at his uncle's smashed car. With a squeeze of the wooden staff in his hand, he made the car's unique pattern whole again, the automobile's metal screeching as it unbent and reformed, the complicated engine snapping into proper place. Any electronics would be fried, and even on the older car that would mean the starter was no good. The thing would need to be towed. "Good show back there," his uncle finally said once he stopped staring at his repaired vehicle. "With those, criminals, and the fire," the man's booming voice trembled a bit. Harry supposed knowing you housed someone capable of mass destruction was one thing, witnessing it personally quite another. Perhaps his uncle might be a tad more lenient when he requested to move permanently to Grimmauld Place at the end of the school year. Chapter 15. Golden Wards. Aura Hill had opted to stay. He knew it was foolish. Surely the boy who lived, as powerful as he had proven to be, could not survive the odds against him. The Death Eaters would target him next. He flew above them in the cloudless sky, his red robes gray in the darkness, but all too visible from below. He should have fled like Oliver, ran back to the ministry for reinforcements and safety in numbers. But he had followed Harry Potter for over a year now, on one shift or another, and he felt some obligation for the preoccupied boy who at times seemed so powerful and knowing, looking over his shoulder directly at where they hid guarding him with a slight smile. And yet, at times, so fragile, stumbling on a curb, jerked away from running into a plastic Muggle sign with a sharp tug of his Muggle-born companion. It had not happened as often lately, but Hill remembered each time the teenager had faltered and misstepped, because it was so at odds with the powerful figure that had summoned a dragon from the stone under his feet with only a wave of his staff. It made the boy human, less a sorcerer and more a teenager, an impression only heightened by the way the boy snuck off with his Muggle-born girlfriend to a house in London, reminding Hill of his own young loves, stealing kisses in alleyways with a mischievous grin. Now, the boy who he had watched so closely faced off against his enemies alone, nearly surrounded by hundreds of pale inferi, a Dark Lord and his remaining minions. A Dark Lord who should be dead. Hill had seen the grotesque infantile version kissed himself, standing by the minister as it happened. This man was not a misshapen child. He stood tall, so similar to the Dark Lord who had terrorized the Ministry when Hill was only just entering Hogwarts. Was it really him? Had some Death Eater merely taken on his appearance? It would not be beyond them. The Dark Lord lookalike approached Potter, called out some threat in a loud voice. Hill barely heard it, and Potter's reply was lost to the wind in his ears. Hill flew lower. He doubted a few feet would matter once the inevitable duel took place. Potter spoke again, a quiet murmur. Hill tightened his fist around his wand, holding the broom steady with his knees. If they could only keep talking, stalling until the Ministry arrived. Hill sucked in a breath when Harry Potter's eyes began to gleam in the dark light, their green irises letting off piercing light, power thickening in the air and thrumming in his own heart, a pulse of foreign energy touching him that he did not expect, making his broom waver in response. Why? Is the fact that you are a thorn in my side not enough? The pale wizard spoke loudly, and Hill saw the Inferi begin to rotate and waver, creeping closer and around the teenager, eyes locked on his form like Kneasel stalking a mouse. Or that you killed me twice before, or that people claim you are greater than me. Twice before. Was this wizard claiming in fact to be the Dark Lord resurrected? That was impossible. The Death Eaters spread out as well, some uneasily looking at the Inferi nearby, even as Hill heard Muggle sirens drawing closer. It would be a bloodbath if the Inferi turned upon the Muggles next, as they doubtless would. Hill could try a few flame spells, but he doubted he would get many off before the Death Eaters took him down. If only the Ministry would hurry the hell up, or maybe, I simply want to see you die, and not even at my own hand. I'll enjoy watching my army tear you apart and consume the pieces. The wizard continued, mocking, smiling with sharp teeth, slitted nostrils widening in excitement. Hill watched as Potter closed those glowing eyes. Was the boy not going to even try to fight? The wizards in dark robes laughed, the Inferi beginning to crouch in preparation of a strike. Hill saw the wizard lift his wand, gesturing toward the Inferi, the blind boy's eyes still closed, head tilted back. Potter! He yelled helplessly in warning despite himself, trying to get the boy to do something. Surely he could recreate his dragon, use fire. Did he know nothing of Inferi? The Inferi began to pounce at the wizard's urging, a wave of dead human flesh ready to rend and tear and feed. Harry Potter smiled, his lips moving with some spell, the runes carved into the staff in his hands beginning to shine. White hands with dirty black claws reached for his torso, teeth snapping towards his skin, and Hill lifted his wand only to be suddenly tossed back high into the air as a wave of heat flooded from the boy. Fire on its heels with feathered wings spread wide and open, a regal neck lifting in some song he couldn't hear with his own ears, only felt trembling in his bones. Fiendfire. The boy had cast Fiendfire. Hill, like all auras, had seen it only in training, enough to recognize the illegal dark spell if he ever saw it, enough to know that he could never possibly control it. The Inferi cowered, and then the Firebird fell upon them, every piece of flesh its fire touched vanishing like air, consumed by a hunger far greater than their own. It swooped around Potter, the roar of its fire pushing him farther and farther up. Inferi burned away with each beat of its wings, dozens and dozens, some completely, some only losing heads and torsos and hands and feet. Anything the flame touched. The bird flew through two of the dark-robed wizards, and they vanished as quickly as the Inferi. Fiendfire knew neither foe nor friend, consuming equally those weak to it as those strong. The pale wizard who so resembled the executed Dark Lord managed to hold it at bay for a moment, turning it aside, speaking some spell that made his ears burn. To Hill's astonishment, the Firebird left the wizard behind, turning to seek easier targets still proliferate around Potter, circling wildly and growing larger, beak open, feathered flames streaming heat and fire. Another Death Eater dodged the flame and leaped toward Potter through its coils. Before Hill could even think to shout another warning, the wizard dropped face down to the ground. Dead. How? Hill abruptly noticed that Potter's gleaming eyes were open, leaving the prone form before him to look towards where the leader stood. The Fiendfire wrapped around his standing body like a protective shield, its extended wings sweeping up Inferi as they approached, mindless, at the bidding of their creator. Hill had never heard of the flame spell used in such a way, had not known it was possible. The pale dark wizard screamed something, lifting his wand, flicking the Fiendfur aside again to kill one of the remaining Death Eaters. Harry Potter only watched him, emerald light growing stronger. The staff in his had shining brightly enough now that Hill could not look directly at it, even through the swirling fire. Potter still did not move as the Dark Lord approached, and Hill saw no spell spoken or light fly as the raving wizard's wooden wand was transfigured to limp string, which was then tossed aside with an angry scream as raw power rose from the man, making the Fiendfur back away from Potter's form like a cowering child. Potter only stood motionless as spell light rose to fall upon him. Movement to the side, the long-hunted crouch Jr. Raising his wand, more curses cast out. Then, finally, the boy jumped back, and even as Hill saw the cast spells falter and splash against empty pavement, Crouch screamed in horror as the Dark Lord froze in place. Potter had cast no spell that Hill could see. Crouch fell to the ground, howling, scratching at his hair, pulling it, eyes rolling in the back of his head as he thrashed. The boy blinked those eerie glowing eyes, and the wizard who looked like the Dark Lord yelled out some garbled sound, shuddering, as Crouch's thrashing abruptly stopped, the wizard going still on the ground, face turned slightly, blank eyes staring dead across the black road. The Dark Lord fell to his knees, eyes sightless, as Potter looked at his kneeling form with clinical detachment, no pity or sorrow on his face, only mild curiosity. His blind eyes gleamed emerald, roving over the wizard's robed form as if he could actually see him on his knees. Then the wizard fell forward to crunch with a broken sound upon the pavement as Potter's firebird flapped its wings and opened its beak to take the offering. Hill watched, feeling oddly distanced to the situation, something like shock at what he was seeing flowing through him, as Potter flicked his tall staff in an annoyed motion, and the dark magic changed from hungry fire to cool, misty rain. Hill, above it, only stared, numb. Potter turned in a circle, energy streaming off him, looking around like he was cataloguing the damage done, that odd light in his eyes that made Hill both fearful and longing to have it upon him, wondering wildly what might happen if he met Harry Potter's gaze when that light shone from them. Would he die, too, screaming like the Death Eaters? Hill shivered, that foreign energy he now knew was Potter's touching him, and he began to reluctantly descend, keeping his distance at first from the boy who was now kneeling beside the face-down wizard. The boy's uncle called out his name, and Hill shuddered as the boy looked at the three muggles who stood far across the street. But they didn't scream or die, only stared with fearful confusion. Hill remembered, abruptly, that he had a job to do. He landed, gruffly assuring the teenager that he would take care of the muggle law enforcement. But he couldn't meet his eyes, couldn't forget the way Crouch had screamed like he was under the Cruciatus curse, being flayed alive from the inside out. He felt the boy's eyes on him like a physical touch, fingers seeming to rove over his very heart and magic with a proprietary gaze. "How will you explain this?" the boy asked absently, and Hill wet his lips and cleared his dry throat. "Oh, standard obliviation spells mostly, not much explanation necessary. Perhaps a car explosion or something of the sort, a wreck even." And just like that, the touch was gone, the energy leaving him cold and oddly alone. Against his better judgment, Hill glanced up and found the boy's gaze as normal as it usually was, no sign of the gleaming eyes present, the scars framing his unfocused eyes pale, lines on his skin from one side of his face to the other. Boy turned to lean against his staff and sighed, looking away from Hill in obvious dismissal. Hill moved away stiffly towards the muggles, just as the ministry finally arrived, too late to be of use for anything but damage control. And still hearing Crouch's tortured screams, Hill raised his wand to begin obliviating. Harry stepped away from the idling cab, his uncle remaining inside as he approached the Granger's house. He hesitated only a moment before ringing the doorbell. He was tired, and it was late. Past midnight, in fact, by the time a wrecker had been set up to tow his uncle's car, and a cab had been called. Statements had been taken by confounded police, and Harry had had to deal with the looks cast at him from the auras nearby. It hadn't escaped his notice, either, that he had not been followed away from the scene by guards. And as much as he had wanted to simply go home and fall into bed to sleep off the growing magical exhaustion, he knew Hermione received the morning paper, and had no doubt at all that the Daily Prophet would rush through some sort of special edition of the night's events. She would worry first, and be angry later, that he hadn't assured her he was safe. "Harry!" Mr. Granger's confused voice came from the doorway, the man's dark hue a slow, tired swirl of color. "I need to speak to Hermione." Harry said quietly, "It's late, son. She's in bed." "John." Mrs. Granger's color peeked around her husband. "Harry, what's going on? Something smells horrid." Harry was well aware that the scent of burned inferi clung to him like macabre perfume. He grimaced. "I just need to talk to Hermione for a minute before I go home. There was an incident tonight. It will be in the papers, and I didn't want her to worry. I'd have called, but your house was on the way." And he really could use a hug at that moment, and Hermione's unique sent to cover up the stink of dark magic and fire. Her soft hair on his face, her warm hands around him, her color blocking out the chaotic light of the world. "Of course, dear." Mrs. Granger moved away with swift efficiency, and Harry stepped inside at Mr. Granger's beckoning motion. He sat on the wide couch, resting his head against his staff where he propped it beside him. He had cast a cleaning charm on himself, removing the soot, but scents were much more difficult to get rid of. He dearly hoped he wasn't going to set Mrs. Granger into a cleaning frenzy. "Harry!" Hermione's voice was worried, her steps clattering down the stairs from her bedroom in a rushed fury. He looked at her, and her hue became detailed and green, her riotous hair tumbling over her shoulders, a robe hastily tied around her, bare legs swiftly approaching. And despite everything that had happened that night, he no longer just wanted a hug. He wanted to run his hands over those legs and, "Harry, what happened?" He blinked and let his look fade away with a shake of his head, Hermione falling into the seat beside him. And with a deep breath, he started at the beginning in his uncle's car. Jane Granger shivered when she saw the teenager's eyes glow. "My goodness, I'll never get used to that." She mumbled to John, who leaned against the door jamb beside her, watching as their daughter rushed to sit beside Harry. "It's just so unnatural." It didn't help that only one solitary lamp was on in the living room. The darkness only made the glow more eerie. John grunted assent, and Jane continued, her hands beginning to restlessly pluck at her pajama shirt's hem. "Should I make cocoa, you think? How long will Harry be staying? I saw a hackney outside." "It's going to be a dreadful fee if he's left waiting out there for very long." Was Vernon inside? Should we invite him in? Look at the poor boy. I was thinking we ought to just let Harry sleep on the couch tonight, though a shower is certainly in order first. If it's going to take very long for him to tell his story. It's past midnight already. Dreadfully late. We all ought to be in bed at this hour. Do you think Harry is all right, besides that smell? Her husband was frowning at the two on the couch, and Jane looked over to see Hermione practically crawling into the young man's lap, wrapping her arms about his shoulders. If the boy didn't look so distraught, she would have had to protest. For appearance's sake, of course. Jane herself had done far more than crawl into boys' laps when she was 17, though not in her parents' living room, in front of them. John cleared his throat, and Hermione's head whipped around with a stubborn flash of brown eyes. Jane knew that look. She saw it often enough in the mirror. Her daughter wasn't going to budge. John grumbled and turned away, sidestepping hiss as the cat came to investigate the commotion. "I'll let Vernon know the boy's staying the night, on the couch." He stomped off, and Jane repressed a smile. Her poor John, refusing to see that his little girl was all grown up. "Who wants some hot cocoa?" she called out cheerfully to the couple on the couch. Hermione stood beside the sofa in the early morning light, watching as Harry slept, her mother's plush comforter thrown over his torso, his bare feet hanging over one arm rest in a position that looking anything but comfortable. Despite it, he slept so soundly she doubted she could wake him with an air horn. She hadn't slept well herself, thinking on Harry's words, the things he had done. His voice as he whispered the realization that finally sunk in as she held him in her arms. "I didn't just kill them, Hermione. I looked at them and I shredded their souls. Worse still was how very easy it all had seemed when he told it. A single thought, and a person was worse than dead. But that was both the horror and the wonder in magic. With only a thought and a desire, nearly anything was possible. Hermione." Her mom whispered from the kitchen. "It's here." She turned and tiptoed out of the living room, looking at the large white owl that preened on the windowsill under her mum's attention. In its claws was a rolled-up newspaper. "Time to see what rubbish the wizards will spin about it all," Hermione muttered, claiming the paper as her mother cooed and offered treats to the smug bird. She only had to look at the headline to know. Hill said his eyes glowed. Rufus heard one aura whisper to another in the long hallway, and we saw burned bodies everywhere. Hills seriously spooked. When we got there, Crouch was just dead on the ground, like he'd been hit with a killing curse. Another added, though Hill claims he didn't see one cast, and this Voldemort lookalike was face first on the ground, dead too, same thing. Course, it was probably just another crazy Death Eater who transfigured himself or somewhat. Maybe we've got 'em all now. You mean Lord Potter's got them all? The third snidely said, and the first two auras nodded their heads in slow agreement. Rufus turned away, ducking back into his office, closing the door with a loud slam. He limped to his chair and let himself settle into it, one leg stretched before him to rest, while he looked at the embellished newspaper on his desk. Lord Potter, the blind sorcerer, attacked in Muggle London, destroys Death Eaters with only a look. Below the headline, a bare summary of events were displayed, all the facts that the media had been able to garner overnight. The Muggle authorities, obliviated. The Muggle press, satisfied with a yarn about exploding cars and gang warfare. Auras responding to an attack on Potter, arriving at a scene of burned-in fairy and dead wizards, all of which bore the dark mark except for the leader, whose body was nearly identical to the Lord Voldemort who had reigned before he was temporarily defeated by an infant Harry Potter. And best of all, for the eager wizarding public, that Potter himself, the now widely dubbed blind sorcerer, had been responsible for it all. Someone, somehow, had gotten a picture of the teenager as he stood beside his uncle in Muggle clothes, black trousers, and a grey long-sleeved shirt, the tall staff held in one hand as he looked out over at the auras with visible power in his gaze. Power that you could see even in a black and white moving picture in a crinkled newspaper. And Hill, blast the fool, had given an interview to the eager reporters without consulting himself or the head aura first, spouting shakily about the teenager's glowing eyes and power, claiming the boy had merely looked at the dark wizards and killed them. He would be reprimanded, but the damage had already been done. Not only was the public aware that their elected savior had used dark magic in the form of fiendfire, which the reporters had loved to report took the form of a phoenix, perhaps the greatest symbol of light magic that there was, but they now all probably believed that the boy could kill with only a glance. The public would either be awed to the point of worship or fearful to the point of hiding their children if he approached. Rufus figured if there was one thing good that came out of it all, it was that no longer was the public afraid of saying Lord Voldemort's name. After all, the infamous Dark Wizard had apparently been killed 3 times over now, and any remaining Death Eaters who were not slain or executed now rested in the renovated Azkaban prison. There was nothing left to fear of Dark Wizards for an irrational public that now trusted with all their hearts in a teenager that would save them. A blind teenager, one with powers Rufus was not sure he believed in, and even if it was true, as the wizarding sheep doubtless would think, would mean Harry Potter was a risk far greater than any self-proclaimed Dark Lord. He would have to talk to him, have to decide for himself what to believe, what measures to take. His own job within the ministry was nearly complete, after all, an aura force that had never looked as good, never been trained as well. A Wisengamot, no longer bound by pureblood agendas, nearly half of their ranks made up of Muggle-borns and half-bloods, all ready to find peace and guard it fiercely. The tide was beginning to turn, and Rufus Scrimgeour knew soon he too would be a relic of the past. Albus Dumbledore heard the news from Kingsley, and he did not for a minute think that the body killed by Harry Potter was anything other than Tom Riddle himself. The force that Severus had been spying on for months, destroyed, in one ill-fated attempt on a boy's life, though the Daily Prophet obviously exaggerated grossly about the boy's power. It was the prophecy, once again, striking true to its word, and one less Horcrux to worry about. Neville Longbottom and Ron Weasley left the headmaster's office for the 6th time during their 6th year, exchanging disappointed looks as they descended the spiraling staircase. Both had been ecstatic to be given some exciting task to do that year. Their 5th year at Hogwarts had been so ordinary and dull that they regretted complaining so bitterly of the events that preceded it. At least then they hadn't been bored. Ron scratched the back of his neck and sighed. Nothing. We've even found 2 hidden rooms and 1 passageway not on the map, and still no stupid crown. I'm beginning to think the thing doesn't exist. Neville was far past beginning to think it. From the very beginning, he had been doubtful that Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem was anywhere near Hogwarts, even though her daughter's ghost had reluctantly described the object to them personally. Surely someone would have found it by now. And now term is almost over. Ron continued. I'm about to roam the grounds as a wolf just to see if that might give me new perspective. The moon rises in just a few days. Worth a shot. Neville scoffed and shoved Ron from the side, rolling his eyes. You know good and well the ministry would yank your enrollment here if they ever caught wind that you left the warded room, wolfsbane or no, and there's students here who would delight in reporting us. Ron's brown eyes glinted with gold in response, but he said nothing. Neville looked down at his shoes. Well, maybe not. I guess things are different now. Different was one way of putting it. Enrollment at Hogwarts had dropped by nearly a fourth after the tournament, and their numbers had already been lowered before that with the events of their second and third years. What remained now of Slytherin were those from neutral families, and the odd group of half-bloods that had been sorted into the pureblood house, a development they had found to be most uncomfortable. The only rival they had once had, Malfoy, had gone from a loud, bold, and sarcastic nuisance to a silent, wickedly sarcastic loner. In their fifth year, Hogwarts had been oddly silent, the headmaster often absent on tasks of his own, McGonagall taking over the school with a firm hand. There were less pranks, less jokes. Everyone remembered classmates gone or dead, every house losing at least one student during the tournament tragedy. Sixth year had been slightly different. With a year between them and the uproar of times past, new students coming in, new hope, the world had seemed a little brighter. And with something to do, to focus on, Ron and Neville had spent most of their free time scouring the castle with Dean and Seamus for any hint of the ancient artifact that the headmaster claimed was central to Hogwarts' safety, cursed somehow by dark wizards and hidden within the school. And now there were rumors that Headmaster Dumbledore was to retire, and not entirely of his own choosing. Neither ministry or school board was happy with the events that had happened at Hogwarts under his watch. Claims that the elderly wizard was failing were abundant, not helped by the way the wizard dressed and the odd things he said at times. They desperately wanted to find the diadem, to give their mentor something back for all they had been given. I'm hungry, Ron abruptly said with a hint of a growl in his voice. You always are, especially this time of the month. Neville sighed, but turned down the corridor that led to the kitchens. The house elves were always glad to provide food for any hungry witch, wizard, or werewolf. It was either extraordinary luck or fate, depending on who told the story. Ron, eating his second plate of nearly raw steak, happened to roll his eyes at Neville's worried glances over the map where it lay unfolded on one of the kitchen tables. Neville, catching the Gryffindor's sarcastic gesture, lost his famous patience. Fine. You think it's so impossible to find some bloody hidden chamber or wardrobe or crown holder? Then maybe I'll just let you out next full moon and get caught by the auras trying to find the stupid mythical thing. Ron, with another eye roll, gestured for another plate from the wide-eyed house elves. Neville jumped to his feet, slamming one fist down on the map, anger and annoyance whirling within him. It's so ridiculous, he said to the room at large, hearing the sounds of cooking still at his shout. If Dumbledore couldn't find it, the headmaster of Hogwarts, how on earth are we supposed to? Sir, Mr. Longbottom, sir, came a tentative query from the side. Neville turned with narrowed eyes, about to deny what was no doubt a plate of biscuits or dessert shoved towards him to quell his temper. House elves thought food solved everything. Pickley knows where a room of hidden things is. Anything hidden at all goes there. Lost socks and broken furniture and knick-knacks and books and... where? Neville broke in urgently, stepping forward to grab the scrawny thing's shoulders. At the table, Ron sniffed, looking over at the waiting plate of meat with a mournful glance. Guess I won't be needing that third plate. When the house elf told them how to enter the room, Neville and Ron found it was not on the map. A blank wall where no room should possibly be, a door where none existed. They only stepped inside for a moment, watching their own darts disappear off the map, seeing endless rows of items in every direction. If anything was hidden at Hogwarts, it would most certainly be somewhere in the mountains of trash. With triumphant grins, they left to report their success. Albus spent 3 hours combing through the room of hidden things, marveling at yet another secret Hogwarts had hidden from him. Misplaced textbooks, the detritus of students long gone, wands, parchment, clothing. Objects of power, crystal balls and rusty metal bowls, jewels that gleamed with inner light. Broken and unbroken furniture, cursed and mundane decorations. And on one shelf, inside a leather box, rested an ancient crown, its metal gleam disturbed with rust, the jewel's sparkle clouded with dust. An object of great light, enchanted to increase memory and the speed of thought, traits that were often conflated with wisdom, which Rowena Ravenclaw treasured above all other things. It was meant to be used as a guiding force, but great intelligence is not always used properly. When Albus gently touched the diadem, he felt the chaotic power within, a wail howling in his ears as light and dark battled fiercely for possession of the object. The Horcrux was a poison, a darkness intolerable and unwanted. He snapped the box shut. If only he could save the precious artifact, it would be a tool future headmasters and mistresses would find most useful when making the difficult decisions within Hogwarts. But a Horcrux could only be destroyed with the complete and final destruction of its bound object. Albus's face set in haggard lines, and with slow, ponderous steps, he left the room and made his way from the grounds to lay another soul to rest. Only two more. Two, Merlin help us, and no more. Hermione read the request from the minister out loud as Harry sat in his bedroom at the Dursley house, carefully beginning the process of packing his things. The letter had come by owl, while Hermione was lecturing him on moving out of his aunt and uncle's house to go live with a crotchety, overworked house elf. His uncle, as Harry had predicted, thought it a swell idea. The Muggle man was beyond disturbed by the sights he saw 2 nights previous. He had even found reasons to avoid taking Harry to the college campus himself. Harry knew he would come around. The man's fear would pass, eased by time, and his mind convincing him it had not been as bad as the first impression gave him. His aunt, of course, insisted Harry reconsider his request to relocate. But Harry was turning 17 in only a few months, and he craved being closer to his laboratory and the Black Library, where he could experiment in peace and study at his leisure. Aunt Petunia, when she saw he was serious and would not be put off, finally agreed, though she insisted he take a full week to pack and think it over. She still hoped to talk him out of it. Dudley, after all, still had another year before he graduated, just as Hermione did. Children, in her opinion, belonged at home where they could be kept out of trouble, especially children like Harry, who she still saw as slightly disabled, powerful magic or not. Request your presence at your earliest convenience, as soon as possible. Hermione's light pulsed in agitation. Why do they bother saying at your earliest convenience when this is pretty much a demand that you come be interrogated by the auras? She spat in his direction. After 2 days, I hoped they were letting it go, illegal magic or not. It's a clear case of self-defense, and there it no one to challenge you on it. One aura was there the whole time, after all. His report was good enough. Too good, rather, Harry thought. I'm sure they just want to close the case with due diligence, that's all. I can go tomorrow morning. Hermione sighed. I'll be in class. Not that I was invited, but if you want company, I don't mind skipping one morning. I've gone over my exam preparation 3 times already, and it's all simple enough once you do the proper reading. Very little extrapolation, mostly memorizing bare facts. She sounded very put off about that fact. Harry smiled. I'm sure I'll be fine. Hermione drew closer, one warm hand touching his own, before she slid down to sit on the bed beside him. Her voice, when she spoke, was low with worry. What will you tell them about? The look. Harry ran one hand through her hair, amazed as always with how soft the blue curls were. How hair gleamed with deep light, but was still, no life in it. Dead strands of genetic material, but beautiful. The best lie is the truth. What Hill described was merely a way I'm developing to see shapes and objects better, using an extension of my own magic to see details. It's not perfect, and cannot be used for an extended amount of time. An unfortunate side effect is that my eyes give off tangible light, a concentration of my magic focused through the optical lens, which is more visible at night than during the day. I do not have to acknowledge the claims that I have the evil eye or some such nonsense. The Death Eaters all fell to wandless, wordless magic, not my look. The truth, she sighed, a warm breath against his shoulder. Barely. I don't suppose the minister will push the matter anyway. You did them a public service, and the papers would never let them forget it if they tried to put you on trial. Still, I don't like how they're making you out to be some, well, superhero. Like you're going to solve all their problems now because you managed to off some wizarding terrorists. 4 separate articles stated you should officially take up your seat on the Wisengamot. 2 seats, actually, Harry said with a frown. And though I suppose I qualify at 17, I doubt anyone would seriously want a teenager helping to run the government, no matter how qualified. It's madness. Hermione huffed. It's the wizarding world, and it is mad. A lot of the time, anyway. And daft. At least the minister seems sensible, but he's the one summoning you to his office like a recalcitrant schoolboy. No, politely summoning me, and more like I was responsible for the deaths of 6 men, 3 of which I intentionally killed, and I'm too politically powerful for more than a slap on the wrist. Harry returned. Hermione leaned into him. I'm trying to feel better about this, and you're not helping. Harry wrapped his arm around her and squeezed softly. I'm sorry. Everything will be fine, and for all the reasons you stated, this is just a formality. She lay there a moment, just breathing, and he saw her light pulse with every breath she took, a nexus of light swarming from head to toe, so familiar and steady. Then Hermione pulled away with a toss of her head, strands of light flying as she stood. Well, that's that. Does this one stay or go? She held up a green mass of light. Harry looked at it, ignoring the slight shiver that he saw flow through her in response. It stays. Girl noticed him first. She had seen his face in the papers more than once, the iconic scars that tarnished the natural symmetry of his face. She rather thought it made him more handsome. She was sure she would marry him one day. He was a hero, just like the knights in her fairy tales, fighting evil men from the back of a dragon. As she stood in the atrium, she tugged sharply on her mum's hand and was ignored as usual. With wide eyes, she watched the cloaked man pass her by and smiled brightly up at his face. When he did not so much as blink in response, she reminded herself that he was blind. But that didn't mean he wasn't still perfect. In the lift, the 2 wizards noticed whom they shared space with and quickly got off on the next level, both amazed and afraid of the blind sorcerer. On level 4, the witch about to step inside paused, her breath stalling in her throat as she looked into green eyes. She froze, and the doors slid closed before she thought to enter, her legs trembling in fear. On level 2, an aura stomped inside, casting only one quick glance into Harry Potter's face. In a low tone, he whispered a quick congratulations on the teenager's swift and final action days before. When the lift reached level 1, the black-haired boy smiled at the aura in thanks and ignored the way the man's light pulsed with adrenaline, as ready for battle as any wizard faced with a charging griffin. Harry stepped on the tangled, pale green light of plush carpet that covered the entire floor of level 1 of the Ministry of Magic, home to the minister and his staff's offices. He approached the desk of a bright lime green secretary, their color bubbling with emotion. Can I help? The witch's excited tone halted awkwardly. She cleared her throat, and he heard the distinct scratch of a quill on wood. You, the minister asked to speak with me. Harry said, and heard her aggressively rearranging papers on her desk, lines of brown light fluttering. Oh, of course. I was told. That is, I thought you'd owl. Oh, but of course that doesn't matter. You are welcome, always welcome. I'll just check. Her light sprang from a chair, her voice fading away as she moved down the hallway, decidedly less bubbly than before. Perhaps he had underestimated the power of the Daily Prophet. He had been skeptical when Hermione insisted people would believe anything it said. He hadn't been expecting quite the level of avoidance and downright fear he was encountering. But maybe with time, right this way, Lord Potter. The lime green witch spoke from beside her desk as she returned, and Harry blinked. Lord, he owed Hermione an apology. It seemed even the ministry employees were ready to fling a title upon him before he was old enough to take up his seats in the Wisengamot. Though, admittedly, it was only a matter of months until he was officially Lord Potter, whether he wanted the bloody seats or not. The lime witch held open a wooden door and closed it behind him with a soft, nearly inaudible snick, leaving him alone in the minister's office. It was green, Green wooden floors, green paneled walls, ancient green furniture. And seated behind the desk was the minister, whose green-yellow hue contrasted perfectly with the golden layer of protective wards he sat within. "Take a seat, Mr. Potter," Rufus Scrimgeour said in a gravely voice, deep and strong. Harry took one of the green chairs, settling on it, eyeing the golden wards speculatively. Were they there just for him, or were they a standard practice for political figures in the wizarding world? "I'm glad you came so promptly. My aide was under the impression you might be reluctant to come here, considering the press and its exaggeration. Here was one wizarding skeptic at least, a rare breed in the magical world. When the leader of part of your world asks for a conference, you comply unless you are an idiot or guilty of something." The minister choked out a laugh. "You're frank. I like that." The man resettled in his chair, light shifting over light. "So I'll be frank as well. Aura Hill's interview was a mistake. Such details should not be given to the press, and most certainly not before they are confirmed by the administration to be fit to print. As it is, a firestorm is brewing around you and what the world thinks you can do. I need to confirm or deny these claims and clarify certain actions Aura Hill said you took 2 nights ago." Harry sat back in his chair and nodded. "I'll be happy to answer any questions you have about that night." The minister made a noise in his throat, and Harry wished he could risk looking to see what facial expression the man might hold. "Are you in fact blind, Mr. Potter?" Harry faced the man's chartreuse light without looking away. "Conventionally, I have some form of mage sight, but it can be lacking. Aura Hill said your eyes glowed, and your movements that day and today show me it is not as lacking as you imply." Harry did not blink at the rapid question. Standard interrogation technique, not giving the person a chance to think over their answers, and therefore lie. "I'm testing a new version of mage sight, and it often has the side effect of creating an optical illusion that my eyes glow in the dark. But it allows me to see more detail, if not true colors. You are aware fiendfire is illegal." The minister jumped subjects. "Just as much as creating inferi, sir. Have you ever tested its use near Hogwarts grounds during your time there?" That question caught him by surprise. Harry paused a second before answering. "I test everything I question, Minister. What did you question about fiendfire? Why it is illegal?" His voice was snide. Harry lifted his chin. "The fact that it is both uncontrollable and can consume anything." A brief pause, then the minister shifted again in his chair. "Aura Hill claimed you controlled fiendfire to destroy the inferi. This implies a lot of practice." The minister was determined to achieve something. Harry wondered just what his aim was. "I did not control it so much as aim it in the right direction. I do not yet know of a way to truly control it." "The truth, not yet. You achieved a corporeal form, a phoenix. It was stated in several reports that the Dark Lord managed the same in the past, except with a serpent form. My staff's interpretation, not mine. With a sufficient amount of power, fiendfire takes on a semi-sentient life of its own, influenced by the caster. If given enough leeway, it will eventually consume the caster and continue to eat everything around until the magic that fuels it is spent. That is why it's illegal. Just like the killing curse, Mr. Potter, magic that kills, that cannot be defended against. Evil, dark magic." The minster was pushing for something again. Harry frowned. "I have not seen or experienced the killing curse since I was an infant. I do not think that any magic is inherently evil, only tainted, broken, by the people who misuse it. Any magic has the potential to be deadly. How did you dispel the fiendfire?" The minister switched subjects again, smoothly. Harry had the distinct, fervent wish that Hermione was with him. This was what he got for underestimating the tenacity of a minister who had served as head aura during a war. "Minister, are you more concerned that I used illegal magic or that I did so without dying? I'm most concerned that you are directly and indirectly responsible for 6 deaths, and yet you sit here as if that fact does not bother you in the least." His voice was dark, and Harry stiffened at the insinuation in it. "They wanted me dead, so I defended myself, sir. And with the inferi, I could not be particular about how I did so. Fiendfire cannot be easily controlled, and I had multiple obstacles. I had to keep it focused around me, and not on the muggles crowding the street behind, or hill up in the air, or the buildings beside me. The 2 Death Eaters it consumed were collateral damage from using it as a weapon. Any lesser flame spell would not have had the range or sentience to protect me from so many attacking in Ferry. I am not bothered that confirmed wanted murderers died when they were trying to kill me and would have went on to kill others, including my friends and family. I won't apologize for it. The minister's voice was soft when he replied. Not many people can kill, even when facing death themselves, not and remain so undisturbed by it. Hill claims you looked at Crouch, Jensen, and the unknown Death Eater, and they, as he says, screamed and fell dead. If that does not sound like dark magic, I do not know what does. I know you had the capability to capture them instead, just as you captured Voldemort and Pettigrew. There was accusation there, and a measure of truth. Harry didn't falter. I did what I thought best at the time under pressure. The Dark Lord was powerful and attacked in tandem with Crouch. Both would have been executed anyway. Both could have potentially escaped. Both were trying to kill me. Would you have done any differently? There was a moment of silence. Then Scrimgeour's light flickered and shifted like candle flame in a breeze. I do not know. I only wish you hadn't done what you did, and in the manner you did, and most of all I wish that it hadn't become common knowledge. Harry laughed. He couldn't help it. I wish I had not been attacked at all. All I've ever wanted is to be left alone in peace. The minister snorted, raising a yellow-green hand to wave in dismissal. Then we will both be equally sorry, for I will have to deal with the press for the next few months, if not until I retire, and you will most definitely not be left in peace, not for a very long time. And Harry, remembering the people he had encountered on his way to the Green Office, had a sinking feeling that the minister was very, very correct about that. For another hour, Harry sat in the minister's office and listened to the former Aura's barely veiled warnings about further use of dark magic, and managed to deftly sidestep, answering too clearly just what he was capable of. When it came time to leave, Rufus Scrimgeour passed through his golden wards to shake his hand, the minister's rough palms calloused from frequent wand work. It meant something that the wizard left his protective wards behind, meeting him without their protection in place. Was it some form of trust, respect, a gesture that he did not think him a threat? You're in a position now, Mr. Potter, to influence our world. Whether you deserve it or not will not change that fact. You will never simply be an anonymous wizard again, if you ever were. The advice, spoken in a gruff tone, fell between them as Harry stepped away. He nodded his head in response as he spoke. Favor easily gained is just as easily lost, Minister. I don't trust it. The older man walked behind his desk, carefully sinking into his chair, yellow-green light swirling behind golden wards once more. You might last after all, Mr. Potter, if you remember that fact. And behind him, the door swung open as the nervous secretary reappeared to escort him away.